Chapter 1. The Gorgon's Rage. There are few betrayals in the grim annals of the 31st millennium more devastating than what unfolded on the ash-scarred plains of Istvan V. The galaxy groaned beneath the weight of civil war. Brother turned against brother, and the dream of unity that had burned bright for 2 centuries died in fire and blood. Yet even in that darkest hour, when loyalty was butchered and hope lay trampled beneath the boots of traitors, destiny trembled on the edge of a blade. The dropsite massacre began as it was meant to end, with the screams of the loyal and the laughter of the damned. Ferrus Manus, the Iron Tenth, the Gorgon of Medusa, thundered across the battlefield with a fury that shook the very foundations of the world. His metallic hands, blessed by the ancient necrodermis of his homeworld's great worm, gleamed in the hellish light of burning drop pods. Behind him, the iron hands surged forward in perfect formation, their black armor scarred but unbroken, their gene-father's rage burning in every gene-enhanced heart. The trap had been perfectly laid. 3 loyal legions, Iron Hands, Raven Guard and Salamanders, had descended upon Istvan V to bring the traitor Horus to account. Yet the second wave, the reinforcements they had counted upon, revealed their true colors with devastating precision. The Iron Warriors, Alpha Legion, Night Lords, and Word-Bearers turned their guns upon their supposed allies. The betrayal was total, the slaughter was absolute. But Ferrus Manus cared nothing for the wider battle raging across the killing fields. His vision had narrowed to a single point of focus, a single name that pounded in his skull with every thundering heartbeat. Fulgrim, the Phoenician, the Palatine, the perfect one who had fallen so far from grace. For months, Ferrus had refused to believe the reports. Fulgrim, his closest brother, the one with whom he had forged weapons and shared dreams of a galaxy made perfect through craft and dedication. Fulgrim could not have turned. Yet here he stood among the traitors, resplendent in his purple and gold, his legion of hedonistic warriors cutting down loyalists with sculptures of violence that married artistry with atrocity. The 2 Primarchs met in the shadow of a crashed stormbird, its hull twisted into abstract sculptures of metal and flame. Around them, the massacre continued, but for these 2 giants, the universe had narrowed to the space between them. "Brother," Fulgrim said, his voice carrying that same melodic quality that had once brought comfort to Ferrus's ears. Yet now it rang hollow, tainted with something that made the Gorgon's metal hands flex involuntarily. "Why do you force me to this? Why could you not see the truth that Horus offers?" Ferrus Manus spoke no words. His hammer, Forge-breaker, the weapon Fulgrim himself had crafted for him in happier days, sang through the air with killing intent. The blow would have shattered a mountain, but Fulgrim flowed aside like liquid grace, his own blade, not fire-blade, but something else, something wrong, hissing as it cut the smoke-thick air. The demon weapon Fulgrim wielded pulsed with an otherworldly hunger. Even Ferrus could sense its malevolence, the way it seemed to drink in the light around it, and transform it into something obscene. This was not the brother he had known. This was not the craftsman-warrior who had stood beside him as they conquered the stars in their father's name. "You have no idea what you have become," Ferrus growled, his necrodermis hands beginning to glow with inner heat. "What you have allowed into your soul." "I have become perfect!" Fulgrim screamed, and for a moment the mask of control slipped. Beneath the elegant exterior, Ferrus glimpsed something desperate, something in terrible pain. "I have transcended the limitations that bound us to mortality and mediocrity. Why can you not understand?" They clashed like falling stars, brother against brother, creation against corruption. Fulgrim's blade wove patterns of impossible beauty as it sought Ferrus's throat, his heart, his soul. The Gorgon's hammer crushed through the air with the weight of worlds, each blow carrying enough force to level fortifications. Yet Fulgrim was faster. He had always been faster. The demon blade found its mark, sliding through the gap in Ferrus's armor with surgical precision, but not for his heart, not for his throat. Fulgrim's hand trembled at the last instant, deflecting the killing blow toward his brother's neck instead. The Phoenician's eyes widened in shock at his own moment of hesitation, but it was too late to correct. The demon weapon descended like judgment made manifest, its edge singing with malevolent joy at the prospect of claiming a Primarch's life. Time seemed to freeze as the blade approached the flesh and bone of Ferrus Manus's neck. The metal should have parted like water. The head of the Iron Tenth should have rolled across the blood-soaked ground of Istvan V. Yet destiny, that most fickle of masters, chose that moment to reveal another path. Ferrus's necrodermis hands moved without conscious thought, driven by instincts deeper than training, older than memory. The living metal that had fused with his flesh in the depths of Medusa recognized the touch of the demon weapon as anathema to its very existence. The hand snapped upward, catching the blade mere inches from his throat. The impact sent shockwaves through both brothers. Fulgrim staggered backward, his perfect features contorting in confusion, and something that might have been relief. The demon weapon shrieked, actually shrieked, as the necrodermis absorbed and nullified its supernatural edge. Where metal met metal, reality itself seemed to bend and twist. Ferrus Manus lived. Blood ran freely from his throat where the blade had partially connected, and his armor was cracked along a dozen lines where the demon weapon's force had been transmitted through his hands. But he lived. He breathed. His twin hearts continued to beat their steady rhythm of defiance. "Impossible," Fulgrim whispered, his melodic voice reduced to a broken rasp. "The blade. It cannot be denied. It has tasted the blood of heroes, the souls of saints. How did you—" The necrodermis hands of Ferrus Manus blazed with sudden inner fire, the living metal responding to his rage and his will. Steam rose where his blood touched the metal, and for a moment Fulgrim saw something in his brother's eyes that made him step backward. "This is not over," Ferrus said, his voice carrying the weight of an oath that would echo across the centuries. "I will find you, brother. In whatever dark corner of the galaxy you choose to hide, I will find you, and I will make you answer for what you have become." The sound of approaching traitor marines shattered the moment. Fulgrim's Emperor's children were closing in, their sensory-enhanced armor tracking their gene-father's position even through the chaos of battle. Ferrus could hear the distinctive whine of plasma weapons charging, the heavy footfalls of Terminators moving to support their corrupted lord. Fulgrim raised his demon blade again, but his hand shook with an emotion he could no longer name. "Brother, please, come with me. Join us willingly, and you will understand. You will see the beauty in what we have become." "The only beauty I will see," Ferrus snarled, "is your corpse cooling on whatever world I finally corner you upon." The Gorgon turned and ran, not from cowardice, never from cowardice, but from the tactical necessity of survival. Behind him, Fulgrim watched his brother's retreat with eyes that held too many conflicting emotions to catalogue. The demon weapon in his hand whispered dark suggestions, promising that next time there would be no hesitation, no deflection, no miracle of living metal to preserve the life of his dearest enemy. But Fulgrim no longer trusted the whispers. The blade had failed, and in its failure he had seen something he thought lost forever. His brother's eyes, filled not with hatred, but with the promise of judgment. Across the battlefield, The loyal legions died in fire and treachery. Corax of the Raven Guard fled with the remnants of his sons. Vulcan of the Salamanders was struck down, his fate unknown. The survivors would carry word to Terra that Ferrus Manus, the Iron Tenth, the Gorgon of Medusa, had fallen in the massacre. They would be wrong. In the depths of a damaged Iron Hand strike cruiser, as it limped away from Istvan V under cover of the system's dying light, Ferrus Manus sat alone in his meditation chamber. His hands, still glowing faintly with residual heat, traced the wound on his throat, the wound that should have been his death. The necrodermis had saved him. The living metal of ancient Medusa had recognized the touch of chaos and reacted to preserve the life of its host. But Ferrus understood, with the clarity that comes only from staring into the abyss, that this was not salvation. This was opportunity. His brother was lost. Fulgrim had fallen to powers that corrupted everything they touched, transforming beauty into obscenity and perfection into abomination. The Imperium would call him traitor. History would record him as one of the damned. But Ferrus Manus would call him prey. The galaxy was vast, filled with countless worlds where a corrupted Primarch might hide. Yet no distance would be great enough, no fortress strong enough, no army large enough to protect Fulgrim from what was coming. The Iron Tenth had died on Istvan V, but from his ashes, something harder and more terrible had been born. The hunter had awakened, and he would not rest until his brother's perfect features were still and cold beneath his necrodermis hands. The war for the galaxy would continue. Terra would burn. The Emperor's dream would shatter into 1,000 fragments. But in the shadows of that greater conflict, another war would begin. One brother hunting another across the stars, carrying with him a promise made in blood and sealed with the scream of a demon blade turned aside. Yet as the strike cruiser carried him away from the killing fields of Istvan V, Ferrus Manus couldn't know that Fulgrim, standing among the corpses of the loyal, felt the same terrible certainty. The hunt would not be one-sided. Predator and prey would chase each other through the darkness between the stars until the universe itself grew cold. The game had begun. And in the grim darkness of the far future, there would be only war and the endless dance of two brothers bound by hatred, love, and the promise of judgment that neither could escape. Chapter 2. Ghosts of Medusa. The Shadows of the Endurance. Eternal stretched long and cold through corridors that had once echoed with the certainty of victory. The Iron Hand's strike cruiser drifted in the void between stars, its hull scarred by traitor fire, and its spirit broken by betrayal. Within its wounded belly, fewer than 300 of the Iron Tenth remained, survivors of a massacre that had claimed the lives of tens of thousands of their brothers. Yet it was not the weight of loss that pressed heaviest upon the ship's corridors. It was the presence of their Gene father, alive when all the galaxy believed him dead. Ferrus Manus sat alone in the deepest chamber of the vessel, surrounded by the sacred relics of his legion and the memories of what he had once been. The wounds from Fulgrim's demon blade had healed with the supernatural resilience of a Primarch, but beneath the regenerated flesh, something else festered. The weapon had left marks that went deeper than skin and bone. Where the chaos-tainted edge had touched him, phantom pain flared with every heartbeat. He could feel it still, the malevolent hunger of the demon trapped within his brother's sword. It had tasted his blood, learned the shape of his soul, and even though the necrodermis had denied it his life, the connection remained. In the quiet moments between sleeping and waking, Ferrus could hear whispers that were not his own, promises of power that made his metal hands clench into fists of righteous fury. The door to his meditation chamber hissed open. Ferrus did not need to look up to know who entered. Captain Santar, the hammer of the 10th, moved with the careful precision of a warrior who understood he was in the presence of something more dangerous than he had ever faced before. "My lord," Santar said, his voice steady despite the weight of what he carried. "Word has reached us from Terra." Ferrus lifted his head slowly, his black eyes reflecting the pale light of the chamber's lumens. "Speak." "The Emperor has commanded all loyal legions to muster for the defense of the throne world. Horus moves toward Terra with a host beyond counting. Gilliman marshals the Ultramarines. The Khan rides from Chogoris. Even the Wolf King stirs from his frozen realm." Santa paused, and when he continued, his words carried the weight of desperate hope. "They believe you dead, my lord. But if you were to reveal yourself, to lead us back to Terra, no." The word fell into the chamber like a hammer blow. Santar's gene-enhanced features could not hide his shock, though discipline kept him from speaking immediately. Around the chamber, the sacred banners of the Iron Hands seemed to tremble in the recycled air. "My lord?" Santa's voice was barely above a whisper. "The Emperor calls. Our brothers in arms rally to defend the cradle of humanity. How can we— Our brothers!" Ferrus rose from his meditation throne, and the sound of his footsteps on the metal deck rang like funeral bells. Where were our brothers when the trap closed on Istvan V? Where was their loyalty when Fulgrim's blade sought my throat? His necrodermis hands blazed with sudden heat, steam rising where moisture in the air touched their surface. "They are not our brothers, Captain. They are strangers who wear familiar faces." Santar stood his ground, though every instinct screamed at him to step back from the rage radiating from his gene father. "The Emperor! The Emperor!" Ferrus said, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout, "created us to be his weapons, tools to be used and discarded as he saw fit. I served that purpose faithfully for 2 centuries. I bled for his dream. I killed in his name. And when I needed him most, when the blade fell toward my neck, where was he?" The question hung in the air like an accusation against the very foundations of reality. Santa opened his mouth to speak, to defend his lord and master, but Ferrus raised one metal hand for silence. "I died on Istvan V," the Primarch continued, his words measured and final. "Ferrus Manus, the Iron 10th, the loyal son who would have died for his father's dream, perished when his brother's blade touched his throat. What stands before you now is something else, something harder, something with a single purpose that burns brighter than any loyalty to distant Terra. And what purpose is that, my lord?" Ferrus turned toward the chamber's main display screen, its surface flickering with static from damaged systems. With a thought, he activated the ship's long-range auspex, calling up star charts that showed the vast expanse of the galaxy spread before them. Somewhere in that immensity, a corrupted Primarch fled from the consequences of his actions. "Fulgrim lives," Ferrus said simply. "He breathes the air of worlds I have never seen, walks on soil that has never known the tread of my boots, believes himself safe in whatever dark corner he has chosen for his refuge." The necrodermis hands began to glow brighter, reflecting off the polished surfaces of the chamber until everything was bathed in harsh light. He is wrong. Santa felt a chill that had nothing to do with the recycled air of the ship's environmental systems. "My lord, surely the wider war must take precedence. If Horus reaches Terra, then loyalists will die defending it. If Horus fails to reach Terra, then traitors will die in the attempt. Either way, men will die, and the galaxy will burn. Ferrus gestured toward the star charts with casual dismissal. But only I can hunt Fulgrim. Only I can make him answer for what he has become. Only I can look into his perfect features and show him the price of corruption. The transformation was complete, though Santa could not yet comprehend its full scope. The Primarch who had led the Iron Hands in 100 victories, who had forged weapons of legendary power and crafted strategies of unbreakable logic, was gone. In his place stood something that wore his face and spoke with his voice, but burned with a purpose that had nothing to do with duty or honor or the greater good of humanity. "Gather the survivors," Ferrus commanded, his attention already turning to the tactical displays that would help him track his prey. "Have them report to the Strategium in 1 hour. We have work to do." "My lord." "What work?" "We are going to become something the galaxy has never seen before," Ferrus said, his metal hands already calling up deployment patterns and fleet compositions on the chamber's hololith displays. "Not Iron Hands seeking victory in battle, but hunters seeking prey in the darkness. We will learn to move like shadows, to strike like lightning, to vanish like ghosts. We will become patient where we were eager, subtle where we were direct, cold where we were passionate." The irony was lost on neither of them, that the most direct and forthright of all the Primarchs was contemplating a war fought in the shadows. Yet as Santar watched his Gene father study the tactical displays, he began to understand that this was not a contradiction, but an evolution. The iron will that had once driven frontal assaults against impossible odds was now focused with laser precision on a single target. "And if the Emperor commands our return?" Santar asked, though he already suspected the answer. "Then the Emperor will discover that some of his weapons have learned to choose their own targets." Hours later, the survivors of the Iron Hands gathered in the ship's main strategium. They came bearing the scars of Istvan Vorf, missing limbs replaced with crude bionics, armor still bearing the burn marks of traitor plasma, faces marked by the hollow stare of those who had seen too much death. Yet they came as Astartes, ready to follow their Gene father wherever his purpose might lead. Ferrus stood before them, his imposing form casting long shadows across the assembled warriors. Behind him, the hololith displays showed star charts and tactical assessments, fleet movements and supply routes, all the mundane logistics that would transform vengeance from dream into reality. "Brothers," he began, and his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. "The Iron Hands Legion died on Istvan Vifta. We are what remains, not a legion, but a weapon forged in the fires of betrayal and tempered by the certainty of our purpose." Murmurs ran through the assembled Marines, but none dared to speak openly. They had followed their Primarch through the hell of the drop site massacre. They would follow him through whatever came next. "We will not return to Terra," Ferrus continued, his words falling like hammer blows on heated metal. "We will not bend the knee to distant masters who were absent when we needed them most. We will not pretend that the old loyalties mean anything in a galaxy where brothers murder brothers for the promises of gods we once believed were myths." He gestured to the star charts behind him, and the display shifted to show known movements of traitor forces, suspected strongholds, the chaotic patterns of civil war spreading across human space. "We have a new purpose. Fulgrim the Phoenician, the Palatine Phoenix, the perfect one who fell to perfect corruption. He believes himself beyond reach, beyond justice, beyond the consequences of his choices. We will teach him otherwise." The modifications began immediately. The Endurance Eternal limped toward the closest Forge world, still held by forces of questionable loyalty, its cargo holds emptied of everything except what would be needed for the hunt. Traditional Iron Hands tactics were dissected and rebuilt. Frontal assault doctrines were replaced with stealth protocols. The art of siege warfare gave way to the science of pursuit. Ferrus threw himself into the work with the obsession of a master craftsman perfecting his greatest creation. He studied reports of chaos corruption with the same intensity he had once brought to understanding the mechanical principles of his necrodermis hands. He memorized the tactical preferences of the Emperor's children, their strengths and weaknesses, their patterns of deployment and retreat. Most disturbing of all, he began to seek knowledge of the chaos powers themselves. Not to serve them, the very thought made his metal hands heat with rage, but to understand them, to know his enemy as completely as possible. "If I am to hunt a demon," he told Santar during one of their increasingly rare conversations, "then I must learn to think like one." The captain of the Iron Hands could only watch in growing horror as his gene father transformed himself into something unrecognizable. The noble Primarch, who had once spoken of duty and honor, now spoke only of vengeance and the perfect kill. The craftsman warrior, who had forged beauty from metal, now forged only instruments of pursuit and death. Yet Santar followed, as did the other survivors. Not from duty, though duty remained. Not from honor, though honor endured. They followed because they had seen what their gene father had seen in the moment when Fulgrim's blade descended. The truth that loyalty meant nothing if it was not mutual, that brotherhood was just another word for betrayal waiting to happen. The galaxy burned with the fire of civil war. On distant Terra, the Emperor prepared his defenses for the siege that would determine the fate of humanity. Across the stars, Primarchs chose sides in a conflict that would reshape reality itself. But in the cold depths of a damaged strike cruiser, something else was being born. Not a legion, but a hunter. Not a Primarch, but a force of nature dedicated to a single purpose. The Iron Hands were dead. Their gene father was dead. Their old loyalties were dead. What remained was the Gorgon, and his terrible patience, and the promise that no distance would be great enough to protect the Phoenician from what was coming for him. The hunt had begun in earnest. Fulgrim would learn in time that some wounds never heal, and some brothers never forgive. The demon blade had failed to claim its prize on Istvan V, but it had birthed something far more dangerous than death. It had created purpose without limit, will without compromise, and hatred refined to perfect clarity. In the grim darkness of the far future, there would be only war. And somewhere in that war, two brothers would dance their eternal dance of predator and prey, each hunting the other across the burning ruins of their father's dream. Chapter 3. The Scent of Perfection. 3 years had passed since the betrayal at Istvan V, and the galaxy burned with the fire of civil war. Across 1,000,000 worlds, brother fought brother in a conflict that had torn the very foundations of reality asunder. The Emperor's grand design lay in ruins, his legions scattered to the solar winds, and hope itself had become a luxury that few could afford. Yet in the shadow of that greater war, another conflict had begun. One fought not for ideology or territory, but for the perfect satisfaction of vengeance long denied. The Endurance Eternal no longer resembled the proud strike cruiser that had carried the Iron Hands to their doom. Its hull had been reshaped by the patient craft of its surviving crew, transformed into something that moved through the void like a predator through dark water. Stealth modifications borrowed from Raven Guard doctrine, hunter-killer systems adapted from Alpha Legion designs, surveillance arrays that could track a single Vox transmission across a dozen star systems. Ferrus Manus had become something the galaxy had never seen, a Primarch who hunted from the shadows. The bridge of his transformed vessel was a temple to information and analysis. Star charts covered every surface, marked with the movements of Emperor's Children warbands across the past 3 years. Supply routes, battle deployments, the subtle patterns of corruption that followed in Fulgrim's wake like a virus spreading through human space. Captain Santar stood beside his Gene father, watching the tactical displays with the hollow stare of a man who had seen too much and understood too little. 3 years of hunting had changed them all, but none more than the Primarch himself. Where once Ferrus had burned with righteous fury, now he calculated with the cold precision of a master craftsman perfecting his greatest work. "The Laren system," Ferrus said, his necrodermis hands tracing patterns of movement across the hololithic display. The birthplace of their corruption, where Fulgrim first touched the demon blade that would damn his soul. His black eyes reflected the pale light of the tactical readouts, and Santa could see something in their depths that made him uncomfortable. He returns there regularly, not physically, but his children make pilgrimage to the site of their first awakening. The captain studied the intelligence reports that had taken months to compile, intercepted Vox transmissions, interrogations of captured Emperor's children, the testimonies of survivors from worlds that had felt the Phoenicians' touch. All of it painted a picture of corruption so complete, so perfect in its horror, that even veteran space marines struggled to comprehend its scope. The 47th millennial, Santar read from the latest reports. 3 companies of Emperor's children, led by Captain Eidolon. They departed the Maelstrom 6 weeks ago, heading toward the Laren system. Intelligence suggests they carry artifacts from their latest conquest, a shrine world called Benediction. Benediction, Ferrus spoke the name like a curse. The world had been famous throughout the Imperium for its cathedrals of crystalline beauty, its choir monks, whose voices could reduce grown warriors to tears of joy. Now it was a charnel house, where the survivors sang songs that drove listeners to madness. What did they take from the ruins? Unknown, my lord. But the survivors spoke of music, songs that changed those who heard them. Harmonies that opened doorways to places that should not exist. Ferrus nodded slowly, his enhanced mind already calculating distances, travel times, the perfect moment to spring his trap. 3 years of hunting had taught him patience, a virtue he had never possessed as the straightforward Primarch of the Iron Hands. The hunt had refined him, distilled his essence down to pure purpose. How many ships accompany the 47th millennial? 3 strike cruisers, my lord, 5 battle barges, escort vessels numbering perhaps 20. They travel in strength, but... Santa paused, consulting his notes. They travel in indulgence. Our long-range auspex detected energy signatures consistent with active pleasure chambers. Combat readiness appears secondary to other pursuits. Perfect. The word carried more weight than any oath of vengeance. Ferrus turned away from the displays, his imposing form already moving with the measured pace of a predator approaching its prey. "Signal the fleet. We move to intercept." The strike occurred 3 days later in the outer reaches of the Laren system, where the light of the dying star painted everything the color of dried blood. The Emperor's Children fleet moved through space with the languid confidence of predators who had forgotten what it meant to be prey. Their formations were loose, undisciplined, shaped more by aesthetic preference than tactical necessity. They died beautifully. The Endurance Eternal and its escort vessels emerged from the shadow of a drifting asteroid field with the sudden violence of a hammer blow. Ferrus had learned the art of ambush from masters of stealth warfare, and he had perfected it with the relentless efficiency that had once made the Iron Hands the Emperor's most dependable siege breakers. Macro-cannon fire tore through the Emperor's children formations before their sensor operators even registered the threat. Boarding pods launched with surgical precision, each one targeted at critical ship systems identified through months of intelligence gathering. The assault was not random violence, but calculated destruction, each blow placed with the care of a master swordsmith folding steel. Ferrus himself led the assault on the flagship, his necrodermis hands glowing with heat as he carved through bulkheads and blast doors with the patience of centuries. Behind him, his iron hands moved through the corridors like the unstoppable force of an avalanche, their tactics adapted for the close confines of ship-to-ship combat. Yet it was what they found within the Emperor's children vessels that marked the true beginning of Ferrus's education in the nature of his prey. The ships were no longer mere instruments of war. They had been transformed into floating palaces of excess, their corridors lined with sculptures that moved and breathed and whispered secrets to those who passed. The air itself was thick with narcotics that would have felled baseline humans instantly, forcing the Iron Hands to seal their armor's atmospheric systems completely. Ferrus found Captain Eidolon in what had once been the ship's strategium, now transformed into something between a temple and a torture chamber. The captain of the Emperor's children knelt before an altar made from what appeared to be crystallized music, fragments of sound given physical form through mechanisms that violated every law of physics Ferrus understood. "The Iron Tenth," Eidolon said without turning around, his voice carrying harmonics that made Ferrus's enhanced hearing recoil in disgust. "We wondered when you would find us. The Phoenician said you would come, eventually. He said you were too much like him to resist the hunt forever." Ferrus stepped closer, his necrodermis hands beginning to smolder with inner heat. "Where is he?" "Everywhere and nowhere." Eidolon finally turned, and Ferrus saw what 3 years of corruption had done to the once proud space marine. The captain's armor had fused with his flesh in places, creating organic curves that suggested things better left unnamed. His face bore the kind of perfect beauty that could only be achieved through pain beyond description. He is the song that plays between the notes, the color that exists in the spaces between light and shadow. He has become something your brutish mind could never comprehend. He has become weak. Ferrus grabbed Eidolon by the throat, lifting the corrupted marine from the deck with casual ease. Hiding behind philosophy and mysticism because he lacks the courage to face what he has done. Eidolon laughed, and the sound carried such perfect joy that several of the Iron Hands took involuntary steps backward. "Face what he has done? O brother of the Gorgon, you understand nothing at all. He has not fled from what he has done. He has embraced it completely. The guilt, the shame, the horror of killing his dearest brother. He has transformed it all into something beautiful." The necrodermis hands tightened, and Eidolon's laughter became a wheeze. "The artifacts from benediction. What are they for?" "A gift," the captain gasped, "for you, dear hunter. He knows you follow his children across the galaxy. He knows you study our corruption, learn our weaknesses, plan your perfect ambush. So he leaves you gifts. Breadcrumbs to follow, songs to hear, sights to see." Eidolon's eyes rolled back, showing whites that had been tattooed with musical notation. "Each gift brings you closer to understanding. Each understanding brings you closer to him." Ferrus released his grip, letting the corrupted marine collapse to the deck. Around the chamber, the crystallized music continued to pulse with its own internal light, and he could hear something in its rhythm that made his twin hearts skip a beat. Not fear. He was beyond such mortal limitations. But recognition. The melody was one he knew, one that Fulgrim had hummed while working at his forge, back when they had been brothers in truth rather than enemies in fact. "He remembers," Ferrus whispered, and his voice carried a note of something that might have been vulnerability. "He remembers everything," Eidolon confirmed. "Every shared moment, every joke, every time you corrected his technique at the forge, every time he exceeded your expectations in battle. He has taken all of that love and transformed it into the perfect weapon against you." The interrogation continued for hours, but Ferrus learned nothing more of tactical value. What he did learn was far more disturbing, that the hunt he had begun was not the one-sided pursuit he had believed. Fulgrim was not fleeing randomly across the galaxy, seeking safety in distant corners of space. He was moving with purpose, leaving a trail of corruption that drew his pursuer deeper into understanding the nature of chaos itself. Each world the Emperor's children touched became a lesson. Each atrocity they committed became a demonstration. Each perfect horror they crafted became a gift offered to the brother who hunted them with such dedicated fury. The artifacts from benediction were indeed a gift, crystallized song fragments that carried within their structure the mathematical formulae of perfect beauty. To study them was to understand something fundamental about the nature of Slaanesh's power. To understand them was to be changed by them. Ferrus ordered the artifacts destroyed, but not before he had learned what they had to teach. The knowledge burned in his mind like acid, showing him new ways to appreciate the corruption he fought against, new methods to understand his enemy's motivations and desires. He told himself it was necessary, that to hunt a demon prince effectively, he must understand how such beings thought and felt and moved through the universe. He told himself that knowledge was merely another tool, like the modified weapons and stealth systems he had adopted for the hunt. He did not tell himself that each lesson brought him closer to becoming the very thing he hunted. The destruction of the 47th millennial was complete within 6 hours. No prisoners were taken beyond Eidolon, who was subjected to interrogation techniques that would have horrified the Ferrus Manus of 3 years ago. No quarter was given to those who begged for death rather than capture. Yet as the Iron Hand's fleet departed Laren space, leaving behind nothing but drifting wreckage and the silence of the void, Ferrus found himself changed by the encounter in ways he had not anticipated. The hunt was no longer a simple matter of tracking prey across the galaxy. It had become a conversation conducted in the language of violence and corruption, with each engagement teaching him something new about the brother who fled before him. Fulgrim was not running blindly. He was leading, drawing his pursuer deeper into a labyrinth of understanding that had no exit. "My lord?" Santa asked, as they reviewed the tactical reports from the engagement. "Where do we go from here? The trail has gone cold again. No intelligence suggests where the Phoenicians' main force might have gone." Ferrus stood before the great viewport of his command deck, looking out at the alien stars of the Laren system. Somewhere in this constellation, Fulgrim had first touched the demon blade that would damn his soul. Somewhere in this space, corruption had first taken root in the heart of the most beautiful of all the Primarchs. "We follow the pattern," Ferrus said finally. "Each gift leads to the next. Each lesson builds upon the last. He is teaching me something, brother by brother, atrocity by atrocity. When the lesson is complete." He left the sentence unfinished, but in his mind the answer was clear. When the lesson was complete, the student would finally be worthy to face the teacher. When Ferrus truly understood the nature of corruption, he would be ready to look upon what his brother had become and deliver the judgment that had been 3 years in the making. The hunt continued. Across the burning galaxy, 2 brothers played their deadly game of pursuit and evasion, each move calculated to bring them closer to the final confrontation that would define them both. Yet, as the Endurance Eternal disappeared into the warp, carrying its crew toward the next lesson in the curriculum of corruption, neither hunter nor prey could know that the education flowed in both directions. Fulgrim was learning too, learning what his brother had become in the years since Istvan Fifter, learning how far the Iron Tenth would go in pursuit of his perfect vengeance, learning that perhaps in the end they were not so different after all. The galaxy burned with civil war, but in the spaces between the greater battles, two Primarchs continued their eternal dance of hatred and understanding, each pursuing the other across the ruins of their father's dream. Chapter 4. Echoes of Terror. The Vox transmission arrived on encrypted channels that few in the galaxy still possessed the codes to decode. It carried the seal of the Ultramarines, the authority of a Primarch, and the desperate urgency of a galaxy dying in the fires of civil war. Yet when the message finally reached the command deck of the Endurance Eternal, Ferrus Manus listened to it with the cold detachment of a predator watching prey from a distance. "Brother," came the voice of Robut Guilliman, measured and precise, even across the vast reaches of space that separated them. "The hour grows dark. Horus moves toward Terra with a host beyond counting. Father calls all loyal sons to his side for the final battle that will determine the fate of humanity itself. Your death was reported at Istvan Fifth, but rumors persist that the Iron Tenth yet lives. If you receive this transmission, I implore you, set aside whatever purpose drives you now and come to Terra. We need every loyal blade in the battle to come." The transmission continued for several more minutes, outlining strategic dispositions and rally points, supply routes, and contingency plans. The voice of the Lord of Ultramar carried the weight of absolute certainty. That duty would triumph over personal desire, that brotherhood would overcome whatever divisions the heresy had created, that the sons of the Emperor would stand together when their father needed them most. Ferrus listened to it all in silence, his necrodermis hands tracing patterns of movement across the star charts that dominated his command center. When the message finally ended, he deleted it without comment. "My lord," Captain Santar said carefully, his voice carrying the weight of 5 years spent watching his gene father transform into something increasingly unrecognizable. "The Ultramarines offer significant intelligence on traitor movements. Alliance with their forces could provide advantages in tracking the Phoenicians' whereabouts." "Could it?" Ferrus turned from the star charts, his black eyes reflecting none of the warmth that had once defined the Primarch of the Iron Hands. "Tell me, Captain, what advantage would we gain by joining Guilliman's campaign? What would we learn about Fulgrim's location by standing on Terra's walls, waiting for Horus to bring his army to our doorstep?" Santa opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again. The answer was obvious, but speaking it aloud would be tantamount to admitting that their gene father had placed personal vengeance above the survival of their species. "Precisely," Ferrus said, reading the captain's silence with perfect clarity. "Guilliman offers us the opportunity to die gloriously in defense of a father who was notably absent when we needed him most. He offers us the chance to stand shoulder to shoulder with brothers who watched from safety while we bled on Istvan Fi." The necrodermis hands began to glow with inner heat. "I have a different purpose, one that does not require the approval of distant lords or the blessing of an absent god." The rejection of Guilliman's plea would have consequences that reached far beyond the immediate tactical situation. Word spread through the fragmented remains of the Loyalist forces. The Iron Tenth lived, but he would not answer the call to arms. Some whispered of madness, brought on by the trauma of Istvan V. Others spoke of corruption, of a Primarch who had fallen as surely as any of the traitors. They were not entirely wrong. The hunt had changed in the months since Leren. What had begun as military pursuit had evolved into something far more personal, far more twisted. Fulgrim had learned of his brother's survival, and with that knowledge, the nature of their conflict had shifted into realms that tested the sanity of all who witnessed it. The first gift arrived 3 weeks after Guilliman's transmission. It came aboard a derelict Emperor's Children vessel, drifting in the void near the Cretaceous system, with no life signs and no energy signatures beyond basic life support. The ship's distress beacon carried a message that made Ferrus's blood run cold. For my dearest brother, who remembers the songs we sang in the forges of Medusa, may you find the harmony you seek. Against every tactical doctrine, against the protests of his officers, Ferrus boarded the vessel personally. What he found in its corridors defied both description and sanity. The ship's crew had been transformed. Not killed, not corrupted in the traditional sense, but changed into something that existed in the spaces between life and death. They moved with mechanical precision through corridors lined with sculptures that depicted scenes from Ferrus's own memories, his first meeting with Fulgrim, their collaboration on the great weapons they had forged together, the moment when they had stood side by side, watching the sunrise over Chemos and dreaming of the galaxy they would conquer in their father's name. But the sculptures moved. The metal figures turned to watch as he passed, their faces shifting to reflect emotions he had tried to forget. Love, brotherhood, the kind of perfect understanding that could only exist between two beings who had been crafted from the same divine template. In the ship's chapel, Ferrus found the true gift. 10 Iron Hands Marines, members of his own legion, who had been declared missing in action during various engagements over the past year. They knelt before an altar, made from melted-down pieces of their own armor, their gene seed extracted and reshaped into something that pulsed with unnatural life. They were alive, breathing, aware, but they had been changed in ways that made Ferrus's enhanced physiology recoil in horror. Their flesh had been replaced with metals that sang with harmonic frequencies. Their voices, when they spoke, carried perfect pitch and mathematical precision that reduced complex emotions to pure musical notation. "Gene Father," they said in perfect unison, their voices creating harmonies that made the air itself vibrate with sympathetic resonance. "We have learned such beautiful songs. Would you like to hear them?" Ferrus killed them all, not out of mercy, though mercy played a part, but out of the cold understanding that this was what Fulgrim wanted him to do. This was the lesson, the next step in the curriculum of corruption that his brother had designed specifically for him, to show him what love looked like when filtered through the lens of Slanesh's power, to demonstrate that even the bonds between Gene Father and Gene Son could be twisted into instruments of perfect, horrible beauty. The psychological warfare escalated from there. Ships appeared in the wake of Ferrus's fleet, carrying messages crafted from the memories of their shared youth. Worlds that the Emperor's children had touched bore sculptures that depicted scenes only Ferrus and Fulgrim could have witnessed. The very stars seemed to align in patterns that reminded the Iron Tenth of conversations they had shared in happier days. Yet the hunt continued. Ferrus adapted his tactics to account for the psychological dimension of the conflict, but he did not stop. Could not stop. The purpose that had driven him from Istvan Warfave had become the only constant in a universe where everything else shifted and changed like reflection in troubled water. Other forces began to take notice of the systematic destruction being wrought across Emperor's children's strongholds. Chaos warlords who had grown comfortable in their domains of excess found their supply lines disrupted, their allies slaughtered, their carefully constructed pleasure worlds reduced to ash and memory. The hunt was creating ripples that spread far beyond its intended targets. It was Magnus the Red who finally attempted to intervene. The encounter took place in the ruins of Prospero, that once great seat of learning, now reduced to crystalline wastelands where knowledge itself had been transformed into weapons of mass destruction. Ferrus had come there following intelligence that suggested Fulgrim sought artifacts from the lost libraries, fragments of lore that could enhance his understanding of the warp's deeper mysteries. He found Magnus instead, waiting for him among the broken spires of what had once been the greatest repository of human knowledge in the galaxy. "Brother," Magnus said, his voice carrying the weight of prescient wisdom and bitter experience, "this path you walk leads only to damnation. I have seen its end, and it brings neither victory nor satisfaction, only emptiness that echoes through eternity." The Crimson King had changed since their last meeting. The shattering of Prospero had broken him in ways that went beyond the merely physical, and the pieces that had been reassembled carried different priorities, different purposes. This fragment of Magnus spoke with the authority of one who had stared into the abyss and returned with terrible knowledge. "You seek to counsel me on damnation?" Ferrus's necrodermis hands blazed with fury as he faced the sorcerer Primarch across the crystalline ruins. "You, who consorted with powers beyond mortal comprehension and brought ruin to your own legion through pride and ignorance?" "Yes," Magnus said simply, "because I have walked the path you now follow. I have felt the seductive pull of purpose that transcends morality, the intoxication of knowledge that justifies any atrocity. I know how it ends, Ferrus. It ends with you becoming the very thing you hunt." "Then you understand nothing." Ferrus moved closer, his imposing form casting long shadows across the broken ground. "I do not hunt Fulgrim to become him. I hunt him to end him, to close the circle that began when his blade sought my throat, to deliver the judgment that has been 5 years in the making." Magnus raised his hands, and the air around them began to shimmer with psychic energy. 5 years of pursuing a single target while the galaxy burns around you. 5 years of studying corruption to better understand your prey. 5 years of making choices that would have horrified the Primarch you once were. The sorcerer's cyclopean gaze fixed upon Ferrus with uncomfortable intensity. "Tell me, brother, when did you last make a decision based on duty rather than vengeance? When did you last consider the greater good above your personal satisfaction?" The question hung in the air like a blade poised to fall. Ferrus felt something shift in his chest, some long-buried part of his soul that remembered what it had meant to serve something greater than himself. For a moment, just a moment, he saw himself as Magnus saw him, a Primarch who had abandoned his responsibilities, his legion, his very purpose in pursuit of a single enemy. Then the moment passed, burned away by the greater fire of his need for resolution. "The greater good," Ferrus said, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout, "died on Istvan V, along with the last of my illusions about brotherhood and duty. What remains is purpose, pure and uncompromising. Fulgrim lives, and while he lives, nothing else matters." The battle that followed shattered what remained of Prospero's great library, reducing the final fragments of accumulated human knowledge to dust and memory. Magnus fought with all the desperate fury of a brother, trying to save another brother from himself, but Ferrus had become something that could not be reasoned with, could not be turned from his path. When the Crimson King finally fled, bleeding and broken, into the swirling madness of the warp, Ferrus felt no satisfaction in the victory, only the cold certainty that another bridge had been burned, another connection to his former life severed forever. Yet as he stood among the ruins of the greatest library in human history, surrounded by the ashes of knowledge that could have elevated his species to new heights of understanding, Ferrus noticed something that made his necrodermis hands clench into fists. Footprints in the crystalline dust, recent ones, the distinctive pattern of Fulgrim's modified power armor, marking a path that led deeper into the ruins toward secrets that even Magnus had not dared to disturb. His brother had been here, perhaps hours ago, perhaps days, close enough that Ferrus could almost smell the corruption that followed in his wake, close enough that the hunt could resume with renewed purpose. The Endurance Eternal departed Prospero, with its holds filled with artifacts of questionable provenance, and its crew more hollow-eyed than ever. Behind it, the ruins of the library continued to burn with fires that would never be extinguished, and the galaxy lost another fragment of the light that had once promised to illuminate the darkness between the stars. Yet Ferrus cared nothing for what was lost, only for what could still be found. Somewhere ahead of him, Fulgrim waited with the patience of ages, knowing that each step his brother took down this path brought them closer to the confrontation that would define them both. The hunt had become something larger than either of them, a force that reshaped everything it touched. In the command center of his flagship, Ferrus studied the star charts with eyes that reflected no light and hands that glowed with the heat of inner fire. Around him, the few remaining iron hands went about their duties with mechanical efficiency, their humanity eroded by years of witnessing their gene-father's transformation. The galaxy burned with the fires of civil war. Terra prepared for siege. Humanity's future balanced on the edge of a blade. None of it mattered. Only the hunt mattered. Only the promise of judgment yet to come. Only the certainty that when brothers met again, one would finally find the peace that only death could bring. Yet neither hunter nor prey could know that death, when it came at last, might not be the ending either of them expected. Chapter 5. The Labyrinth of Flesh. 7 years had passed since the betrayal at Istvan Mulfefij, and the galaxy had transformed into something unrecognizable. The siege of Terra had ended in fire and ash. The War Master Horus lay dead by his father's hand, and the surviving traitor legions had fled into the roiling madness of the Eye of Terror. The great heresy was over, its architects scattered to the warp winds, but the wounds it had carved across reality would never heal. Yet in the deepest reaches of that cosmic wound, where time flowed like poison honey and space folded in upon itself like origami made from screaming flesh, the hunt continued. The Endurance Eternal no longer bore any resemblance to the proud vessel that had once carried the Iron Hands to glory. 7 years of pursuit through realms where physics bent to the will of laughing gods had changed it, as surely as it had changed its crew. The ship's hull crawled with modifications that would have been called heretical in any other context. Demon engines that fed on the psychic energy of their operators, corrupted machine spirits that whispered secrets in binary cant, weapon systems that had been blessed by powers whose names could not be spoken without inviting madness. Ferrus Manus stood upon the command deck, his imposing form silhouetted against the impossible vista of the Eye of Terror's interior. Before him stretched a realm where purple suns sang arias of perfect beauty, while their gravity wells pulled entire fleets into spiraling dances of destruction. Demon worlds drifted through the void like jewels in a crown of madness, each one a testament to the creative power of the Prince of Pleasure. "The torment of bliss," Captain Santar said, his voice carrying none of the emotion it had once possessed. 7 years of witnessing his gene father's transformation had hollowed him out, leaving behind something that functioned like a space marine but felt like a ghost. Intelligence confirms Fulgrim's presence on the primary continent. The entire landmass has been redesigned. Ferrus studied the tactical displays with eyes that reflected the shifting colors of the warp storms outside. The world below had once been a thriving hive world, home to billions of Imperial citizens. Now it had been transformed into a sculpture of living flesh and crystallized sensation, its cities rebuilt as monuments to experiences that existed beyond the boundaries of sanity. "What of our allies?" Ferrus asked, his necrodermis hands tracing patterns of deployment across the hololithic projections. "Warsmith Kroger reports his forces are in position," Santar replied, consulting data slates that bore the 8-pointed star of chaos on their surfaces. "The Iron Warriors have their own grievances against the Phoenician. His excesses interfered with their siege of Talon. They hunger for vengeance as much as we do." The alliance with the fallen Iron Warriors had been a necessity born of desperation. 7 years of hunting through the eye of terror had taught Ferrus that pride was a luxury he could no longer afford. If chaos-corrupted siege specialists could provide the firepower needed to corner his prey, then he would ally with the damned themselves. He had already damned himself in ways that mattered more. The descent to the planet's surface was a journey through layers of reality that existed only in the fever dreams of mad prophets. The Endurance Eternal's modified teleportarium translated matter across dimensions that had no names, depositing assault forces directly into the heart of a pleasure palace that defied every law of architecture and physics. Ferrus materialized in a grand hall whose walls were made from living skin that pulsed with visible pleasure at his presence. The floor beneath his feet sang with each footstep, harmonies that tried to seduce his enhanced hearing into accepting the beauty of corruption. Above him, a ceiling of crystallized sound formed geometric patterns that told stories of perfect agony and exquisite joy. He felt nothing but the cold certainty of purpose. The iron hands who accompanied him moved through the palace corridors with mechanical precision, their humanity eroded by years of witnessing horrors that would have broken lesser minds. They carried weapons that hummed with demonic energy, their power sources fed by the screams of bound entities that existed beyond the material realm. Each piece of equipment was a compromise with forces that Ferrus had once sworn to destroy. Yet they were effective, more effective than anything in the Imperial arsenal. The palace's defenders came at them in waves of perfect beauty and absolute horror. Emperor's children, marines whose armor had fused with their flesh, creating organic curves that suggested pleasures beyond mortal comprehension. Demon engines that moved with the grace of dancers while wielding weapons capable of reducing mountains to crystalline dust. Mortal cultists whose surgical modifications had transformed them into living instruments of sensation. Ferrus killed them all with the methodical efficiency of a master craftsman perfecting his greatest work. His necrodermis hands blazed with heat that could melt ceramite, while demon-forged weapons augmented his already superhuman capabilities. He had become something that existed in the spaces between loyalist and traitor, neither fully human nor entirely corrupted. He had become whatever was necessary to complete the hunt. The confrontation came in the palace's central chamber, a vast dome whose interior had been sculpted from the dreams of a dying god. Fulgrim waited there, seated upon a throne made from crystallized music and solidified light, and for the first time in 7 years, the brothers looked upon each other with their own eyes. The transformation was complete. Fulgrim had abandoned any pretense of mortality. His form expanded into the serpentine magnificence of a demon prince. 4 arms extended from a torso that combined the beauty of classical sculpture with the alien wrongness of warp-spawned flesh. His face retained the perfect features that had once marked him as the most beautiful of all the Primarchs, but those features now carried an otherworldly quality that made mortal minds recoil in confusion. "Brother," Fulgrim said, his voice creating harmonics that turned the air itself into a musical instrument. "You have come so far, changed so much. I hardly recognize the righteous Primarch who once lectured me on the virtues of duty and honor." Ferrus approached the throne with measured steps, his enhanced senses cataloguing every detail of his brother's transformed state. "I recognize you perfectly," he replied, his voice carrying the weight of 7 years spent studying corruption in all its forms. "You have become exactly what you always were, beautiful on the surface, empty at the core." The demon prince laughed, and the sound created ripples in reality that made the palace walls pulse with sympathetic vibration. "Empty? Oh, dear brother, I am fuller than I have ever been. Every sensation the galaxy can offer flows through me like wine. Every pleasure, every pain, every experience that pushes the boundaries of what is possible, I have made them all part of myself. And what has it cost you?" Ferrus drew his weapons, not Forgebreaker, that relic of a more innocent time, but blades forged in the fires of demon foundries and quenched in the tears of angels. Your legion is scattered to the warp winds. Your home world is ash. Your father's dream lies in ruins. What pleasure compensates for such loss? "The pleasure of perfection," Fulgrim replied, rising from his throne with fluid grace that defied the laws of physics. "The joy of transcending every limitation that once bound me to mortality and mediocrity. You cannot understand, because you still cling to the illusion that there is meaning beyond sensation, purpose beyond the pursuit of ultimate experience." The battle that followed shattered the pleasure palace and everything in it. 2 beings who had been crafted as living weapons by a god unleashed the full scope of their power against each other, their conflict reshaping reality around them like clay in the hands of a master sculptor. Fulgrim fought with the impossible grace of a creature that existed partially outside the normal flow of time. His 4 arms wielded weapons that sang with demonic power, each blade capable of cutting through dimensions as easily as flesh. He moved like liquid music given form, his attacks creating patterns of beauty so perfect that they induced temporary madness in those who witnessed them. Yet Ferrus had learned. 7 years of studying corruption, of adopting chaos techniques, of becoming whatever was necessary to match his prey, had transformed him into something that could wound even a demon prince. His necrodermis hands blazed with heat that could harm warp-spawned flesh, while his demon-forged weapons carried blessings that made them anathema to creatures of the immaterium. The first blood drawn was Fulgrim's, a diagonal cut across his perfect torso, dealt by a blade that screamed with the voices of bound demons. The demon prince staggered backward, his 4 eyes widening in something that might have been surprise. "Impossible," Fulgrim whispered, his harmonious voice reduced to a broken rasp. "You are mortal, unchanged." "How can you—" "I changed," Ferrus said simply, pressing his advantage with relentless precision. "I became whatever was necessary to hurt you, whatever was necessary to make you pay for what you chose to become." The battle raged across the dome chamber and beyond, spilling out into the palace's outer courtyards, where it carved new geography from the planet's surface. Fulgrim's demon engines clashed with Iron Warrior's siege weapons, while Emperor's children marines died beneath the methodical assault of Ferrus's corrupted iron hands. Yet it was the personal duel that mattered. 7 years of hunt and pursuit had led to this moment, when predator and prey finally stood face to face and tested their relative strength against each other. Fulgrim fought with the desperate fury of a creature that had believed itself beyond physical harm, while Ferrus attacked with the cold precision of an executioner delivering long-delayed justice. The Diamond Prince bled. His perfect flesh could be cut. His transcendent form could be wounded. The revelation changed everything about the nature of their conflict. "You feel it now," Ferrus said, as his blade found its mark again, opening a line of flowing silver across Fulgrim's serpentine lower body. The fear, the uncertainty, the knowledge that for all your power, all your corruption, you are still vulnerable to the judgment you have spent 7 years trying to escape. Fulgrim's response was a scream of frustrated rage that shattered every piece of crystallized music within a kilometer radius. The Demon Prince gathered his power and unleashed it in a wave of pure sensation that would have reduced mortal minds to gibbering madness. Ferrus weathered it like a mountain weathers a storm, his iron will unbroken by experiences that transcended the boundaries of sanity. When the assault ended, he was still standing, still advancing, still carrying the promise of judgment in his burning hands. Yet victory, when it seemed within reach, proved as elusive as the hunt itself had been. Fulgrim's demon nature allowed him advantages that mortal flesh could not match: the ability to phase partially out of reality, to draw power from the emotional resonance of the battle itself, to call upon reserves of energy that existed beyond the physical realm. The Demon Prince fought his way clear of Ferrus's assault through a combination of supernatural agility and desperate cunning. As the palace collapsed around them, and the planet's surface began to buckle under the strain of their conflict, Fulgrim opened a portal to the warp and stepped through it with fluid grace. "This is not over, brother," he said, as reality closed around his retreating form. "You have shown me that the hunt can flow in both directions. When next we meet, I will be ready for what you have become." Ferrus stood among the ruins of the pleasure palace, his armor cracked and smoking, his necrodermis hands glowing with residual heat. Around him, his iron hands collected their dead and prepared for extraction, while Iron Warrior's demolition teams reduced what remained of the palace to rubble and ash. The hunt would continue, but the dynamic had changed. For the first time since Istvan V, Ferrus had proven that his quarry could be wounded, could be hurt, could be brought to bay, and made to face the consequences of his choices. The realization filled him with a satisfaction that had nothing to do with duty or honor or the greater good of humanity. It was the satisfaction of a predator that had drawn blood from prey that had believed itself untouchable. Captain Santar approached his Gene father as the extraction ships descended through the planet's tortured atmosphere. The captain's face bore the hollow expression of a man who had witnessed his own damnation and found it acceptable. "Orders, my lord?" Santar asked. "We adapt," Ferrus replied, studying the tactical readouts from the engagement with the cold analysis of a master strategist. "He knows we can hurt him now. He will change his patterns, improve his defenses, become more cautious in his movements. We must become more cunning in our pursuit." The Iron Hands began the long journey back to their fleet, carrying with them samples of demon technology and fragments of corrupted knowledge that would allow them to enhance their capabilities for the next phase of the hunt. Behind them, the torment of bliss burned with fires that would never be extinguished, its transformation into a monument of agony and ecstasy, serving as a reminder of what happened when the Iron Tenth came calling. Yet as the Endurance Eternal departed the demon world's orbit, Ferrus found himself changed by the encounter in ways he had not anticipated. The taste of Fulgrim's blood on his demon-forged blades had awakened something in him that had nothing to do with duty or justice or the righteous pursuit of vengeance. It had awakened hunger, the desire not just to wound his brother, but to possess him, to own him completely, to make him understand that the hunt would never end, could never end, because it had become the only relationship that gave meaning to either of their existences. The galaxy had been reshaped by civil war, its very fabric torn by the ambitions of gods and the failures of heroes. In the depths of that cosmic wound, two brothers continued their eternal dance of pursuit and evasion, each changed by the other, each defined by their mutual obsession. Yet as the warp storms of the Eye of Terror swallowed the Endurance Eternal once again, neither hunter nor prey could know that their next confrontation would be their last, or that the ending they both anticipated would be nothing like what either of them expected. Chapter 6. Brothers in Damnation. 10 years had passed since the betrayal that set two brothers on their path to mutual destruction, and the galaxy had learned to whisper their names with the reverence reserved for forces of nature beyond mortal comprehension. The great scouring continued its bloody work across 100 systems, loyalist forces hunting down the remnants of the traitor legions with methodical precision. Yet even those grand campaigns paled before the legend of the Iron Tenth's endless pursuit. Ferrus Manus had become myth. Accounts of his appearances spread through both loyalist and traitor forces like wildfire. A ghost who materialized wherever emperors' children gathered, bringing death with the inexorable certainty of entropy itself. Some claimed he had died at Istvan V as recorded, and what hunted through the darkness was merely the vengeful spirit of a murdered Primarch. Others whispered that he had become something worse than dead, a creature of such focused purpose that mortality itself had bent to accommodate his need for vengeance. Both explanations carried truth, though neither captured the full scope of what Ferrus Manus had become. The message arrived through channels that no loyalist force should have possessed, encoded with ciphers that belonged to the deepest archives of chaos knowledge. It carried no threats, no demands, no elaborate psychological warfare. Only coordinates and a simple statement that made Ferrus's necrodermis hands blaze with anticipation. Come home, brother. Let us finish what we began. Medusa hung in the void like a corpse, its surface scarred by orbital bombardment that had reduced the once proud Forge world to a sphere of cooling metal and crystallized ash. The clans that had forged Ferrus in the crucible of their endless wars were dust now, their great machines silenced forever, their dreams of technological transcendence reduced to radioactive craters that would glow for millennia. Fulgrim had destroyed it all. Not in rage, not in some fit of artistic passion, but with the cold calculation of a master strategist who understood exactly what would draw his prey to the killing ground of his choosing. The Endurance Eternal descended through Medusa's poisoned atmosphere alone, its escort fleet holding position in the outer system per Ferrus's explicit commands. This confrontation would be personal. Whatever happened in the ruins of his homeworld, it would happen between brothers, without witnesses to judge the outcome, or survivors to carry tales of what transpired. Ferrus found Fulgrim waiting in the remains of the Forge of Souls, the sacred foundry where he had first learned to work metal with his transformed hands. The demon prince sat upon a throne made from the melted-down remains of the Forge's great machines, his serpentine form coiled in perfect aesthetic composition against the backdrop of devastation he had created. "Welcome home," Fulgrim said, his voice creating harmonics that made the twisted metal around them sing with sympathetic vibration. "I have been preparing for this moment for months. Every detail has been crafted to perfection. The lighting, the symbolism, the emotional resonance of returning to the place where your legend began." Ferrus walked through the ruins with measured steps, his enhanced senses cataloguing every detail of the destruction. The Forge Masters were gone, their knowledge scattered to the radioactive winds. The great anvils where he had learned the secrets of creation lay shattered and cold. Even the chamber where he had first touched the necrodermis that would define his existence had been reduced to slag and memory. "You destroyed them for theatre," Ferrus said, his voice carrying no emotion beyond the cold statement of fact. "Billions of lives, centuries of accumulated knowledge, the birthplace of the Iron Hands Legion, all of it sacrificed for the aesthetic pleasure of creating the perfect stage for our confrontation. Finally, you begin to understand." Fulgrim rose from his throne with fluid grace, his forearms moving in patterns that created fractal geometries of meaning in the air around him. "This has never been about territory or ideology or the fate of the galaxy. It has been about us. Only us. Two brothers locked in a dance that has consumed everything we once claimed to care about." The revelation struck Ferrus like a physical blow, though his expression remained unchanged. 10 years of pursuit, of studying corruption, of adopting the tools and tactics of his enemies, all of it had been orchestrated. Fulgrim had not been fleeing randomly across the galaxy. He had been leading, drawing his pursuer deeper into obsession with each carefully placed clue, each perfectly timed escape. "The warbands I destroyed," Ferrus said slowly. "The worlds I purged, the allies I abandoned. You planned it all. Not planned, composed." Fulgrim gestured to the ruins around them, with the pride of an artist unveiling his masterpiece. Like a symphony written across decades, each note building toward this perfect crescendo. "You have become everything I needed you to become, brother. Ruthless where you were once honorable. Obsessed where you were once dutiful. Willing to embrace corruption where you once embodied purity." Ferrus felt something shift in his chest. Some long-buried fragment of the man he had been before Istvan Fef. For a moment he saw himself as Fulgrim saw him, a Primarch who had abandoned every principle he had once held sacred, who had used the tools of damnation to pursue a vengeance that had consumed not just his enemies, but his very soul. Why? The question emerged from depths he had not explored in years. "What did you gain by turning me into this?" "Understanding." Fulgrim's perfect features carried an expression of genuine sadness. "The knowledge that corruption is not something that happens to us, but something we choose. I chose it when I picked up the demon blade. You chose it when you decided that vengeance mattered more than duty. We have both walked willingly into damnation, brother. The only difference is that I accepted what I was becoming. The battle began without warning, as these things always did, between beings who understood each other too well for words. Fulgrim flowed from his throne like liquid music, his demon-forged weapons singing arias of death as they sought Ferrus's heart. The Iron Tenth met him with the mechanical precision of a master craftsman, his necrodermis hands blazing with heat that could wound even warp-spawned flesh. They fought among the ruins of the forge where Ferrus had learned to create, their conflict destroying what little remained of the sacred machines that had shaped both the Primarch and his legion. Each blow exchanged carried the weight of 10 years' hatred, but also something else. A desperate need for resolution that had nothing to do with victory or defeat. Fulgrim moved with the impossible grace of a demon prince, his four arms weaving patterns of attack that existed partially outside normal space-time. His serpentine lower body coiled and struck like a living weapon, while his perfect features showed the kind of ecstatic joy that could only come from experiencing sensation beyond mortal comprehension. Yet Ferrus had learned. 10 years of studying corruption, of adopting chaos techniques, of becoming whatever was necessary to match his prey, had transformed him into something that could wound even transcendent beings. His demon-forged weapons carried blessings that made them anathema to creatures of the warp, while his necrodermis hands had been enhanced with knowledge gleaned from a dozen forbidden sources. The first critical blow came when Ferrus caught one of Fulgrim's weapons in his blazing hands and twisted with mechanical precision. The demon prince's lower left arm separated from his body in a spray of silver ichor, the severed limb writhing on the forge floor like a dying serpent. Fulgrim's scream of pain and rage shattered every piece of crystalline metal within a kilometer radius, but the demon prince didn't falter. Instead, he pressed his attack with renewed fury, his remaining 3 arms moving even faster as he adapted to the loss with supernatural resilience. The return stroke came moments later. Fulgrim's demon blade, the same weapon that had nearly claimed Ferrus's life on Istvan Fey, found its target at last. Not his throat. The necrodermis hands rose to block instinctively, as they had so many times before. But the weapon's edge carried power beyond the merely physical, and when it met the living metal of Ferrus's transformed hands, both forces met in a collision that violated the fundamental laws of reality. The necrodermis cracked. For the first time since his transformation on ancient Medusa, the living metal that had defined Ferrus Manus showed damage that went beyond the cosmetic. Fracture lines spread across both hands like a spiderweb of silver lightning, and through those cracks, something that might have been blood or might have been liquid starlight began to seep. Both brothers staggered apart, wounded in ways that went beyond the merely physical. Fulgrim cradled the stump of his severed arm, while silver tears ran down his perfect cheeks. Ferrus stared at his damaged hands, watching the necrodermis struggle to maintain its integrity against forces that existed beyond the material realm. "Do you see?" Fulgrim whispered, his voice cracking with an emotion that had nothing to do with physical pain. "Do you see what we have done to ourselves? What we have become in pursuit of this perfect hatred?" For the first time in 10 years, Ferrus truly looked at his brother. Not as prey to be hunted, not as corruption to be purged, but as the being who had once stood beside him in the forges of creation and dreamed of a galaxy made perfect through their combined efforts. He saw the damage that their conflict had wrought, not just on the worlds they had fought over, not just on the forces that had died in their wake, but on themselves. Fulgrim had transcended mortality, but at the cost of his humanity. Ferrus had maintained his physical form, but had sacrificed his soul to obsession. They had become perfect enemies because they had both abandoned everything that had once made them brothers. "I see," Ferrus said quietly. "I see what the hunt has cost us both." Hope flickered in Fulgrim's 4 eyes, the first genuine emotion the demon prince had displayed in years. "Then perhaps we can—" "And I reject it." Ferrus's voice carried the finality of a funeral bell. "Whatever we were before, whatever we might have been, that died on Istvan V, along with the rest of our illusions. You are corruption given form. I am vengeance made manifest. There can be no reconciliation between such forces." The hope in Fulgrim's eyes died, replaced by something that might have been despair. "Even now? Even after seeing what our hatred has done to us both?" "Especially now." Ferrus began to advance again, his cracked hands still blazing with inner fire. Because I understand at last what you have made me, and I accept it completely." Fulgrim fought as he retreated, his remaining weapons weaving defensive patterns that created barriers of crystallized sensation in the air. But the demon prince's heart was no longer in the battle. The revelation had broken something in him. The artistic perfectionist who had orchestrated their conflict across a decade, suddenly confronted with the ugliness of what his masterpiece had become. "I gave you everything," Fulgrim said, as he opened a portal to the warp, reality tearing like silk under the pressure of his desperate need to escape. Knowledge, purpose, the perfect enemy to define yourself against. I made you into a legend. "You made me into a monster," Ferrus replied, making no effort to prevent his brother's retreat. "The difference is that I have learned to love what I am." Fulgrim stepped through the portal with the defeated grace of a fallen angel, his perfect features marked by an expression of profound sadness. "Then we are both damned, brother, and I fear there will be no redemption for either of us." The portal closed with a sound like reality, sighing in relief. Ferrus stood alone among the ruins of his homeworld, surrounded by the debris of a forge that had once created wonders and now held only ash and memory. His necrodermis hands pulsed with fractured light, the cracks in their surface serving as a permanent reminder of the price he had paid for his obsession. Yet he felt no regret, no doubt, no desire to change the path he had chosen. The hunt would continue. It had to continue, because without it, without the perfect clarity of purpose that came from pursuing his corrupted brother across the galaxy, Ferrus Manus would have nothing left but the acknowledgement of what he had become. And that acknowledgement would destroy him more completely than any weapon ever could. He walked back to his landing craft through the radioactive ruins of his childhood, his damaged hands leaving silver traces in the ash with each step. Behind him, the Forge of Souls collapsed completely, its structural integrity finally failing under the weight of the battle that had raged within its walls. The Iron Tenth departed Medusa for the last time, carrying with him the certainty that the hunt would continue until one brother finally granted the other the peace that only death could bring. Yet both now understood that death, when it came, might not be the ending either had anticipated. In the space between the stars, between sanity and madness, between love and hatred, two brothers continued their eternal dance. Each had seen what they had become. Each had been offered the chance for redemption, and each had chosen to remain damned rather than abandon the only relationship that still gave meaning to their existence. The galaxy burned with the fires of the Great Scouring, but in the depths of that cosmic conflagration, a more personal fire continued to burn with undiminished intensity. It would burn until the universe itself grew cold, or until one brother finally found the courage to end what they had both chosen to begin. Chapter 7. The Iron Serpent. 15 years had passed since the betrayal that set the galaxy ablaze, and the hunt had evolved into something that defied every tactical doctrine ever written by mortal strategists. What had begun as a simple pursuit between two brothers had metastasized into a web of conspiracy and counter-conspiracy that stretched across 1,000 systems, touching every level of imperial society, from the humblest planetary governors to the highest echelons of the administratum itself. The war room aboard the Endurance Eternal bore no resemblance to the Spartan command centers that had once defined Iron Hand's doctrine. Hololithic displays covered every surface, their pale light illuminating star charts, marked with the movements of agents, informants, and assets scattered across the galaxy. Data streams flowed like rivers of light through processing cogitators that had been enhanced with technologies that would have been called heretical in any other context. Ferrus Manus stood at the center of this web, his cracked necrodermis hands moving across control surfaces with the precision of a master puppeteer adjusting the strings of a galaxy-spanning performance. The networks he had built over the past 5 years extended into every corner of human space. Corrupted imperial officials who fed him intelligence in exchange for protection from their enemies, mercenary companies who hunted emperors' children for coin rather than conviction, even elements within loyal Astartes chapters who believed they were serving the greater good by supporting a legendary Primarch's quest for justice. None of them understood the true nature of what they served. None of them could comprehend that their dutiful reports and carefully gathered intelligence were feeding an obsession that had consumed not just their hidden master, but the very foundations of sanity itself. "The Chemos Gambit is ready for execution," Captain Santa reported, his voice carrying the hollow tone of a man who had ceased to question the morality of his orders years ago. "Our agents within the Ultramarine Second Company have confirmed the intelligence. Lord Calgar believes he is acting on information provided by surviving loyalists from the Emperor's children. He has no idea the source is ourselves." Ferrus studied the tactical displays with eyes that reflected none of the warmth they had once carried. Chemos, the adopted homeworld of Fulgrim, hung in the holographic projection like a jewel of perfect beauty. A world of crystal spires and artistic wonder that had shaped the Phoenician's aesthetic sensibilities long before his corruption. Intelligence suggested Fulgrim had returned there, seeking something in the ruins of his past that might provide the key to ending their eternal conflict. It was almost certainly a trap. But then, Ferrus had become very good at walking into traps with full knowledge of their nature and emerging victorious. "Deploy the fleet," he commanded. "Full stealth approach. If Fulgrim wishes to use his home world as bait, then we shall see which of us has learned more from our years of mutual instruction." The journey to Chemos took them through sectors that bore the scars of their private war, worlds where emperors' children had established pleasure cults, only to find their populations mysteriously disappeared before imperial reinforcements arrived, systems where chaos war bands had been systematically hunted to extinction by forces that appeared from nowhere and vanished just as quickly. The galaxy had learned to fear the spaces between the greater campaigns, where two brothers played their deadly game with the lives of billions as gaming pieces. Yet as the Iron Tenth's fleet approached the Chemos system, Ferrus found himself confronted with something he had not anticipated in 15 years of pursuit. The planet was empty, not destroyed, not corrupted, not transformed into some monument to excess and sensation. Simply evacuated. The crystal spires still rose toward the heavens with their impossible beauty. The gardens where Fulgrim had learned to appreciate perfection in all its forms still bloomed with flowers that existed nowhere else in human space. The galleries where he had first encountered art that spoke to something deeper than mere aesthetic appreciation remained intact, their contents undisturbed by the passage of years or the touch of war. But there was no life, no population, no defenders, no trap waiting to be sprung. Fulgrim had abandoned his homeworld completely, sacrificing everything he had once claimed to love for the simple tactical advantage of denying his pursuer the satisfaction of a meaningful victory. The realization struck Ferrus with the force of a physical blow. In 15 years of hunt and counter-hunt, he had never considered that his brother might choose to abandon rather than defend, to sacrifice rather than preserve. It was a level of strategic thinking that went beyond mere tactics into the realm of pure psychological warfare. "My lord," Santa said carefully, his voice carrying the weight of someone who understood they had been outmaneuvered completely. "Orders." Ferrus stood on the command deck of his flagship, looking down at a world that should have been the site of their next great confrontation, and felt something that might have been respect for his opponent's capabilities. Fulgrim had studied him as carefully as he had studied Fulgrim. The demon prince understood that his pursuer's greatest strength, the relentless certainty of purpose that drove him forward, was also his greatest weakness. Ferrus needed victories to sustain his obsession. He needed progress, advancement, the sense that each engagement brought him closer to his ultimate goal. By removing the possibility of meaningful victory, Fulgrim had struck at the very foundations of his brother's psychological architecture. "Begin systematic scans of the planet," Ferrus commanded finally. "Every structure, every underground complex, every possible hiding place. If Fulgrim left so much as a single message for us to find, I want it located and analyzed." The search took 6 days and revealed something far more sophisticated than a simple evacuation. Fulgrim had not merely abandoned Chemos, he had transformed it into a work of art. Every building, every monument, every carefully tended garden had been arranged to tell a story that only Ferrus could read. The placement of objects, the angles of shadows cast by the crystal spires, even the patterns of flower growth in the abandoned gardens, all of it combined to create a message written across an entire world. "Do you see it yet, brother?" the message read when finally decoded. "The beauty of what we have become? 2 serpents swallowing each other's tails, locked in an embrace that will continue until the universe grows cold. I have given you purpose. You have given me meaning. We are perfect enemies because we are perfect lovers, neither able to exist without the other, neither capable of destroying what we most need to preserve." The psychological warfare escalated from there. Across 100 worlds, Ferrus found evidence of Fulgrim's passage, not the crude corruption that had marked the demon prince's earlier activities, but sophisticated psychological operations designed specifically to frustrate and confuse his pursuer. False trails that led to empty systems, decoy operations that mimicked the Emperor's children's tactical patterns, but yielded no meaningful intelligence. Entire networks of mortal agents who believed they were serving one cause while actually advancing another. Fulgrim had learned to think like Ferrus, methodical, patient, willing to sacrifice immediate gratification for long-term strategic advantage. In response, Ferrus found himself adopting the artistic sensibilities that had once defined his brother, crafting operations that were beautiful in their precision and elegant in their execution. They were becoming each other, predator and prey, hunter and hunted, each shaped by their understanding of their opposite, until the distinctions between them blurred beyond recognition. The battle above Chemos came 3 months later, when Fulgrim finally revealed himself, leading a fleet of Emperor's children vessels that materialized from the warp with the sudden violence of a supernova. The engagement was everything that the planetary assault hadn't been: furious, personal, devastating in its intensity. Yet it was not a battle in any traditional sense. It was a conversation conducted in the language of void warfare, each fleet movement and weapons deployment carrying layers of meaning that went far beyond mere tactical necessity. Fulgrim's forces moved with the grace of dancers, their formations creating patterns of aesthetic beauty, even as they delivered death with surgical precision. Ferrus's fleet responded with mechanical perfection, each maneuver calculated to maximum efficiency, while simultaneously expressing his contempt for his brother's artistic pretensions. They spoke to each other through lance fire and torpedo spreads, through the positioning of capital ships and the timing of boarding actions. The battle raged for 18 hours without either side gaining decisive advantage, and when Fulgrim's forces finally withdrew into the warp, both brothers understood that they had been changed by the encounter. "He knows us," Ferrus said, as he reviewed the tactical recordings from the engagement. Every weakness, every strength, every pattern of thought that drives our decision-making. We have studied each other so completely that we have become perfect equals. The implications were staggering. 15 years of pursuit had not brought Ferrus closer to capturing his prey. They had created a state of perfect strategic balance where neither brother could gain lasting advantage over the other. Each move was anticipated, each strategy countered, each trap avoided, through intimate knowledge of how the other's mind worked. Yet the balance was not stable. It could not be stable. Perfect equals locked in eternal conflict, created pressures that had to find release somehow, and when that release came, it would reshape everything around it. The networks that both brothers had built began to take on lives of their own. Ferrus's corrupted imperial officials started pursuing their own agendas, using the resources he had provided to settle personal grudges and advance private ambitions. Fulgrim's mortal agents grew tired of serving purposes they could not understand and began creating their own cults of excess and sensation. The hunt was metastasizing beyond the control of either brother, becoming a force that affected the galaxy's development in ways that neither had intended. Trade routes shifted to avoid systems where the hunters operated. Entire sectors developed their own defensive measures against the possibility of being caught in the crossfire of the eternal war. The Administratum created new departments specifically to monitor and analyze the intelligence reports that flowed from their activities. "We have become an institution," Ferrus observed, as he reviewed reports of how various imperial agencies had adapted their procedures to account for his activities. A force that shapes galactic civilization simply by existing. The realization carried with it a terrible understanding. The hunt was no longer about justice or vengeance or the resolution of their personal conflict. It had become something larger, a cosmic force that gave meaning and purpose to both their existences, while simultaneously justifying every choice they had made along the way. They were no longer hunting each other. They were maintaining each other. Each brother had become the reason for the other's existence, the perfect enemy that validated every sacrifice and justified every compromise with powers better left untouched. Yet as Ferrus stood in his command center, surrounded by the technological marvels and strategic networks that represented 15 years of obsessive dedication, he found himself confronted with a question that he had been avoiding since their confrontation on Medusa. What would happen when one of them finally won? The question hung in the air like a blade poised to fall, and for the first time in years, Ferrus Manus, the Iron Tenth, the Gorgon of Medusa, the perfect hunter who had sacrificed everything in pursuit of his corrupted brother, felt something that might have been fear. Not fear of death or defeat or the judgment of history. Fear of success. Fear that the hunt might actually end, and with it, the only purpose that still gave meaning to his existence. In the depths of space, in the shadow of a world that had been transformed into a message of perfect understanding, two brothers continued their dance of mutual destruction. Each had become what the other needed most, a worthy opponent, a perfect enemy, a reason to continue existing in a universe that had long since ceased to make sense. The galaxy burned with the fires of 1,000 conflicts, but at its heart, the greatest fire of all continued to burn with undiminished intensity. It was the fire of obsession refined to perfect clarity, of purpose distilled to absolute essence, of love transformed into the most beautiful hatred the universe had ever seen, and neither brother could imagine an existence without it. Chapter 8. The Pleasure of Pain. 20 years had passed since the betrayal that shattered the galaxy's innocence, and the hunt had transcended every boundary of sanity or comprehension. Across the Imperium, in whispered conversations between inquisitors and hushed councils of high lords, the names of Ferrus Manus and Fulgrim were spoken with the reverence reserved for forces of nature beyond mortal control. Their conflict had become legend, myth, and nightmare, a cosmic dance that influenced the development of entire sectors while remaining forever beyond the reach of imperial intervention. The trap had taken 3 years to construct, weaving together technologies that should never have been combined and knowledge that should never have been pursued. In the roiling madness of the maelstrom, where reality bent and twisted under the pressure of warp storms that had raged since the galaxy's youth, Ferrus Manus had built his masterpiece, a web of forbidden technology that could cage even a demon prince. The Endurance Eternal hung motionless in the eye of the storm, its hull crackling with energies that existed in dimensions beyond normal space-time. Around it, a constellation of smaller vessels maintained position with mechanical precision, their crews long since replaced by servitors whose lobotomized minds could function in proximity to the warp tech without descending into madness. What remained of the Iron Hands Legion had become something that defied classification. Part space marine, part demon engine, part extension of their gene father's implacable will. Ferrus himself stood at the heart of the construct, his form so heavily modified by 2 decades of enhancement and replacement that only his face remained recognizably human. Necrodermis no longer merely covered his hands, but had spread through his entire body, creating a hybrid being that existed somewhere between flesh and machine. Cables and conduits emerged from his skull, connecting him directly to the ship's machine spirits and the vast network of sensors that monitored every particle of matter within a dozen light-years. He felt Fulgrim's approach long before any conventional detection system could have registered it. The Demon Prince's presence in the warp created ripples that only someone who had studied corruption for 2 decades could recognize, subtle distortions in the fabric of reality that spoke of transcendent power, moving with purposeful intent. "He comes," Ferrus announced, his voice carrying across multiple Vox channels simultaneously. The words were unnecessary. Every system aboard the Endurance Eternal had been calibrated to his enhanced consciousness, responding to his thoughts as readily as his spoken commands. "Activate the trap." The maelstrom convulsed. Energies that had been carefully gathered and focused for months, discharged in patterns that violated the fundamental laws of physics, creating barriers and conduits that forced the warp itself into configurations that would contain even a being of Fulgrim's transcendent nature. Space folded inward like a closing fist, leaving the Demon Prince only one possible route of escape, directly through the killing field that Ferrus had prepared with obsessive precision. The battle that followed defied every tactical manual ever written. Fulgrim's fleet emerged from the warp already under assault, his ships immediately beset by weapons that fired projectiles through dimensions that existed sideways to normal space-time. The Demon Prince himself appeared on the command deck of his flagship. His serpentine form now evolved beyond the merely monstrous into something that hurt to perceive directly. Yet even as the trap closed around him, Fulgrim laughed, not with the artificial harmonics that had once marked his corruption, but with genuine joy that transcended the boundaries of madness. "Oh, brother," his voice echoed across multiple dimensions simultaneously, "you have outdone yourself. This is truly beautiful." The chase began with Fulgrim's fleet breaking through the weakest point of the containment field, sacrificing half his ships to create a gap through which his flagship could escape. Ferrus followed immediately, his enhanced consciousness calculating pursuit vectors across 17 different dimensional matrices, while simultaneously coordinating the movements of his fleet through space that existed in constant flux. They raced across the segmentum solar, their running battle leaving scars on reality that would persist for millennia. Above Inwit, ancient fortress bastions crumbled as the wake of their passage destabilized the planet's tectonic structure. Through the Hydrophore sector, merchant fleets reported impossible sights, ships that moved backward through time while firing weapons that existed tomorrow. The Imperial Navy received orders to avoid entire systems where the laws of physics had been temporarily suspended by the passage of beings whose conflict operated according to rules that predated human understanding. Yet Fulgrim was losing ground. 20 years of preparation had given Ferrus advantages that even a demon prince could not entirely overcome. The Iron Tenth's ships moved with inhuman coordination, their machine spirits linked to his enhanced consciousness in ways that created a fleet mind capable of anticipating Fulgrim's movements before the demon prince himself had made them. It was when the pursuit reached the ruins of Prospero that the nature of the chase changed completely. The homeworld of the Thousand Suns still bore the scars of its destruction, its crystalline cities reduced to fields of broken glass that sang with residual psychic energy. Among these ruins, Magnus the Red maintained his vigil, not the broken fragments that had fled to the Eye of Terror, but something else, something that had transcended the simple division between loyalty and treachery to become a force dedicated to the preservation of knowledge itself. Fulgrim's flagship descended toward the planet's surface, with Ferrus in close pursuit, both brothers apparently seeking the intervention of their psychic sibling. Yet when they manifested in the ruins of the great library, Magnus greeted them not with welcome, but with profound disgust. "Look what you have become," the Crimson King said, his voice carrying the weight of 10,000 years accumulated wisdom and sorrow. "Two beings who once embodied the noblest aspirations of our father's vision, reduced to this obscene parody of brotherhood. I will aid neither of you in your mutual destruction." Magnus stood between them in the ruins of Tizca, the city of knowledge, his form shifting between the various aspects of his shattered psyche. Scholar, sorcerer, demon prince, and something that transcended all three. Behind him, the crystalline structures that had once housed the greatest repository of human learning pulsed with residual energy from psychic experiments that had torn holes in reality itself. "You misunderstand," Ferrus said, his enhanced consciousness already calculating the angles of attack that would let him reach Fulgrim despite Magnus's interference. "This is not mutual destruction. This is the completion of a work that began 20 years ago. I will have my brother's life, or I will die in the attempt. There are no other possibilities." "And that," Magnus replied, "is precisely why you have both become abominations. You have reduced infinite possibility to a single obsession, transforming love into hatred so perfect that it cannot distinguish between the two." The battle in Tizca's ruins was brief, but devastating. Magnus wielded powers that reshaped reality with casual gestures, creating barriers of crystallized time and weapons forged from pure mathematical concepts. Yet against the combined assault of both his brothers, beings who had spent 20 years learning to think and fight as perfect enemies, even his transcendent abilities proved insufficient. Ferrus moved with the mechanical precision of a living weapon, his enhanced body interfacing directly with technologies that allowed him to manipulate matter at the subatomic level. Fulgrim flowed like liquid music made manifest, his daemon form shifting through dimensions that existed only in the spaces between sensation and meaning. Between them, they overwhelmed Magnus's defenses and forced the Crimson King to retreat into the deeper mysteries of the warp. Yet victory over Magnus was merely the prelude to the chase's continuation. Fulgrim used the battle's aftermath to access the webway, the network of interdimensional tunnels that connected every corner of the galaxy through pathways that existed outside normal space-time. The Demon Prince plunged into passages that had been old when humanity first looked up at the stars, with Ferrus following mere seconds behind. The webway chase defied every law that governed normal existence, through tunnels carved from crystallized possibility, past nodes where ancient civilizations had once maintained their vigil over reality's fundamental structure. The two brothers raced toward a confrontation that would determine not just their own fates, but the nature of obsession itself. Neither brother truly understood the pathways they traveled. The webway had been crafted by intelligences that thought in concepts beyond human comprehension, designed to facilitate travel for beings whose perception of reality operated according to principles that predated the material universe. Yet both Ferrus and Fulgrim had transcended their original limitations, one through mechanical enhancement that allowed interface with any technology regardless of its origin, the other through demonic transformation that let him exist partially outside the normal flow of causality. The chase led them through dimensions where color had taste and sound, cast shadows, past realms where the Eldar gods had once walked before their civilization's fall scattered their consciousness across the warp winds. Ancient Wraithbone constructs registered their passage with algorithms that had been calculating the same mathematical theorems for 60 million years, their artificial consciousness barely capable of comprehending the nature of the beings that raced through pathways designed for more civilized purposes. The pursuit ended on a dead craft world, Myrmidon, whose population had chosen extinction rather than birth, Slanesh through their excess. The massive vessel drifted in the webway's deepest reaches, its infinity circuits dark and cold, its wraithbone halls echoing only with the whispered memories of 1 billion souls who had chosen oblivion over corruption. It was there, in the heart of a necropolis that spanned continents, that Ferrus finally cornered his prey. Fulgrim waited in the craft world's central chamber, where the infinity circuit's main node had once channeled the psychic energy of an entire civilization. The Demon Prince had evolved again during their chase, his form now incorporating elements that existed beyond the physical realm, geometries that hurt to perceive directly, colors that conveyed meaning in languages that predated speech, a presence that simultaneously embodied perfect beauty and absolute horror. 20 years, Fulgrim said, as his brother approached through halls lined with the psychic impressions of 10,000 generations. 20 years of chase and counter-chase, hunt and evasion, each of us becoming what the other needed to justify continued existence. Do you know what we are, brother? Ferrus stood at the chamber's threshold, his enhanced consciousness interfacing with the craft world's dormant systems, learning the nature of Eldar technology through direct neural contact. His form had transcended even the hybrid state he had achieved in the Maelstrom. He was now something that existed partially in multiple dimensions simultaneously, a being that thought with machine precision while feeling with the intensity of a god. "We are what we chose to become," he replied. "I chose to become whatever was necessary to hunt you. You chose to become whatever was necessary to make that hunt meaningful. We are the perfect expression of purpose, refined to absolute clarity." "No," Fulgrim said, his voice creating harmonics that made the wraithbone walls pulse with sympathetic vibration. "We are lovers, the most perfect lovers the galaxy has ever seen, because we have transcended every boundary that once separated desire from hatred, pursuit from embrace, murder from consummation. The truth of it hung in the air between them like a blade poised to fall. 20 years of mutual obsession had transformed them both into beings whose entire existence was defined by their relationship to each other. They had become creatures that could only exist in opposition, perfect enemies, whose conflict was the most intimate form of connection either had ever experienced. Yet as they faced each other in the heart of a dead civilization, surrounded by the psychic echoes of beings who had chosen extinction over corruption, both brothers understood that their chase was approaching its end. Not because one would finally defeat the other, but because they had both transcended the categories of victory and defeat entirely. The final confrontation was beginning, and with it, the resolution of a conflict that had reshaped not just their own natures, but the fundamental structure of reality around them. In the cold depths of a dead craft world, witnessed only by ancient machines that barely remembered the civilization they had once served, two brothers prepared to discover whether perfect love, expressed as perfect hatred, could survive the completion of its own purpose. The galaxy held its breath, though it did not know why, as forces beyond mortal comprehension moved toward a collision that would determine the nature of obsession itself. Chapter 9. The Gorgon's End. The corridors of Myrmidon stretched before them like the hollow bones of some cosmic leviathan, their wraithbone walls pulsing with the faint, psychic resonance of 10 million souls who had chosen extinction over damnation. In the heart of this necropolis, where the Infinity Circuit's central node had once channeled the dreams and nightmares of an entire civilization, two brothers prepared to complete a work that had consumed 20 years of their existence and reshaped the very fabric of reality around their obsession. Ferrus Manus moved through the halls like death given purpose, his enhanced form interfacing directly with the craft world's dormant systems, learning the secrets of Eldar technology through neural pathways that existed partially outside normal space-time. His necrodermis hands blazed with energies that made the ancient wraithbone sing in harmonics of warning and mourning, while his consciousness expanded to encompass the vast scope of the dying vessel's architecture. Behind him, the psychic impressions of the craft world's former inhabitants whispered in languages that predated human speech, their ghostly voices carrying fragments of wisdom and regret that spoke to the futility of all pursuits save the embrace of oblivion. They had seen this before, the madness of perfect obsession, the way love and hatred could intertwine until they became indistinguishable from each other. The cosmic dance that ended only when the dancers destroyed everything around them, including themselves. Fulgrim waited in the central chamber, no longer fleeing, no longer seeking escape through trickery or misdirection. The Daemon Prince had transcended even his evolved form, becoming something that existed in the spaces between dimensions, part serpent, part angel, part geometric impossibility that hurt to perceive with unenhanced senses. Yet for all his transcendence, he looked tired. Not physically. Such concepts had ceased to apply to his existence years ago, but tired in a way that went deeper than flesh or spirit. 20 years, Fulgrim said, as his brother entered the chamber, his voice creating ripples in reality that made the Infinity Circuit's dead nodes flicker with residual energy. 20 years of chase and pursuit, hunt and evasion, each of us becoming what the other needed to justify continued existence. I am tired, brother. So very tired of running from what we both know must end. The chamber around them was a cathedral of crystallized possibility, its walls lined with memory crystals that contained the final thoughts of 1 billion souls who had chosen death over the corruption that birthed Slaanesh. Ancient machines hummed with barely perceptible energy, their purpose long forgotten, but their vigil continuing through eons of darkness. This was a place where civilizations came to die with dignity, and it seemed fitting that two brothers should come here to resolve their own cosmic tragedy. Ferrus approached with measured steps, his enhanced consciousness cataloguing every detail of Fulgrim's transformed state. The Daemon Prince was magnificent and terrible, beautiful and abhorrent, a perfect expression of everything that Slaanesh represented. Yet beneath the transcendent horror, Ferrus could see something that made his twin heart skip a beat: resignation, acceptance, the willingness to finally face judgment for what he had chosen to become. "You have cornered me at last," Fulgrim continued, his forearms spread wide in a gesture that was equal parts surrender and invitation. 20 years of pursuit have brought us to this moment. I offer no resistance. I seek no escape. Do what you came to do, brother. End what we began on Istvan V. The Demon Prince's submission should have filled Ferrus with triumph. This was the moment he had worked toward through 2 decades of corruption and compromise, the perfect resolution of the hunt that had defined every choice he had made since his apparent death. Fulgrim knelt before him, beautiful and damned, offering his life in payment for the betrayal that had shattered both their worlds. Yet as Ferrus raised his demon-forged blade, as his necrodermis hands blazed with the heat that could wound even transcendent flesh, something unprecedented happened. He hesitated. Not from mercy. That emotion had been burned out of him years ago. Not from doubt about the righteousness of his cause. He had moved beyond such simplistic concepts long before. He hesitated because, in the moment when victory was finally within his grasp, he saw with perfect clarity what lay beyond it. Emptiness. Silence. The vast, hollow space that would remain when the hunt ended, and he no longer had purpose to drive him forward. For 20 years, Fulgrim had been the center around which his existence orbited. Every thought, every action, every choice had been shaped by the need to track and corner his corrupted brother. Without that purpose, what would remain? "I see it in your eyes," Fulgrim whispered, his voice carrying notes of something that might have been pity. "You understand at last what I have known for years. The hunt is not about ending. It is about continuing. You do not pursue me to destroy me. You pursue me to preserve the only relationship that gives meaning to either of our existences." The truth of it struck Ferrus like a physical blow. He was not a hunter seeking prey. He was half of a cosmic dance that required both participants to maintain its rhythm. Without Fulgrim to pursue, he would be nothing more than a monster without purpose, a corruption without justification, a tragedy without meaning. Yet the realization brought with it another understanding, one that filled him with a cold satisfaction that had nothing to do with mercy or forgiveness. If the hunt was what gave his existence meaning, then the hunt must continue. But not as it had before, not with the possibility of ending hovering like a blade above both their heads. "Rise," Ferrus commanded, lowering his weapon but not sheathing it. "I will not grant you the peace of death. You will continue to run, and I will continue to pursue. But now we both understand what we are to each other." Fulgrim's 4 eyes widened in horror as he comprehended what his brother was offering. Not victory, not defeat, not even the resolution of their conflict, but its eternal continuation. The Demon Prince had sought death as release from the burden of what he had become, only to discover that his pursuer would deny him even that final mercy. "You cannot," Fulgrim breathed, his perfect features contorting with an emotion that went beyond despair. 20 years I have carried the weight of your hatred, the burden of knowing that my corruption poisoned everything we once shared. I came here to face judgment, to finally pay the price for what I chose on Istvan V. You cannot deny me that release." "I deny you nothing," Ferrus replied, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "I preserve what we have both become. You are corruption given perfect form. I am vengeance refined to absolute essence. Together, we are complete. Apart, we are merely fragments of what we could have been. The horror of it settled over both brothers like a shroud. They were trapped, not by circumstances or the machinations of gods, but by their own choices, their own needs, their own inability to exist without the perfect enemy that defined their purpose. The hunt would continue, but not toward any resolution. It would continue because continuation was all either of them had left. Fulgrim rose slowly, his serpentine form coiling with reluctant grace. "Then we are both damned," he said quietly, "bound together by hatred that has transcended even the possibility of satisfaction. We will dance this dance until the universe grows cold and dark, neither of us able to end what we both need to preserve." "Yes," Ferrus agreed, and his voice carried a note of something that might have been contentment. "We are damned together, as we should be, as we always were meant to be." The chamber began to tremble. The psychic weight of their revelation was affecting the craft world's structural integrity, causing reality to bend and twist under the pressure of a truth too terrible for the universe to contain easily. Ancient machines screamed warnings in languages that had been old when the galaxy was young, while the memory crystals began to crack and shatter as the stored consciousness of the dead recoiled from the cosmic horror being enacted in their sacred space. Yet neither brother moved to escape. They stood facing each other in the heart of a dying vessel, two beings who had transcended every limitation except their need for each other, and felt the perfection of their mutual damnation settle around them like a mantle of stars. It was only when the craft world's hull began to rupture, when the infinity circuit's collapse threatened to tear holes in reality itself, that they finally acted. Not together. They were beyond such simple cooperation, but in perfect synchronization, each understanding exactly what the other would do, because they had become reflections of a single cosmic truth. Fulgrim opened a portal to the warp, reality tearing like silk under the pressure of his desperate need to escape the craft world's collapse. Yet he moved slowly, deliberately, giving his brother time to prepare his own exit. The hunt would continue, but it would continue according to new rules that both brothers now understood. Ferrus activated his ship's teleportarium, the enhanced systems piercing through the craft world's psychic interference to lock on to his enhanced signature. He could have prevented Fulgrim's escape. 20 years of technological advancement had given him the tools to cage even a demon prince. Yet he made no effort to interfere with his brother's retreat. They departed Myrmidon separately, each returning to their respective fleets, each carrying with them the knowledge that everything had changed while nothing had ended. The craft world collapsed behind them, its ancient structure finally unable to bear the weight of what it had witnessed. 10 million souls who had chosen extinction over corruption found their rest disturbed by the cosmic horror of beings who had chosen neither extinction nor redemption. But eternal conflict. The galaxy would continue to burn with the fires of their pursuit. Worlds would fall in the crossfire of their game. Civilizations would rise and fall, while two brothers played their deadly dance across the stars. Yet now both understood the true nature of what they were doing. They were not seeking resolution. They were maintaining each other. Each chase gave purpose to the pursuit. Each escape justified the hunt. Each confrontation proved that both were still necessary, still vital, still the perfect enemies that validated every choice they had made along the way. In the cold depths of space, as their fleets moved toward different corners of the galaxy, Ferrus Manus and Fulgrim the Phoenician carried with them the certainty that their conflict would never end, could never end, because ending would mean admitting that 20 years of corruption and compromise had been for nothing, and neither brother possessed the strength to face such emptiness. The hunt continued, not toward victory or defeat, not toward justice or revenge, but toward the perfect preservation of a relationship that existed beyond such mundane concepts. In the grim darkness of the far future, there would always be war, and at its heart, the most intimate war of all, between brothers who had learned that the only thing worse than eternal conflict was the possibility of peace. Yet as the void swallowed both fleets, neither brother could know that their decision to preserve their conflict would have consequences beyond their ability to control or comprehend. Forces greater than Primarchs, older than the Imperium itself, had taken notice of their cosmic dance, and some of those forces found it beautiful enough to ensure it would continue long past the deaths of stars. Chapter 10. Ghosts in the Machine. The rumors began as whispers in the deepest archives of the Administratum, fragments of intelligence reports that should never have seen the light of imperial day. 2 Primarchs, both declared dead for decades, were engaged in a conflict that spanned multiple sectors and defied every attempt at classification or containment. The reports were contradictory, impossible, and yet they carried the kind of detail that could only come from direct observation. Ferrus Manus, the Iron Tenth, the Gorgon of Medusa, was alive. Not merely alive, but transformed into something that existed beyond the boundaries of life and death, humanity and machinery, purpose and madness. His pursuit of his corrupted brother had become the stuff of legend among both loyalist and traitor forces, a cosmic constant that shaped the development of entire star systems. Fulgrim the Phoenician, demon prince of Slanesh, was not merely fleeing, but participating in an elaborate dance of predator and prey that had transcended simple concepts of hunter and hunted. Their conflict had become something larger than either of them, a force that influenced galactic civilization in ways that few could understand and none could control. The impact on their respective followers was immediate and devastating. The Iron Hands, chapter, inheritors of Ferrus Manus's genetic legacy, found themselves torn between contradictory impulses that threatened to shatter their unity entirely. In the fortress monastery of Medusa, where the echoes of their gene father's presence still lingered in the very metal of its construction, debates raged with the intensity of theological warfare. Chapter Master Cardan stood before the assembled Iron Council, his bionic features reflecting the uncertain light of the chamber's lumens. Around him, the greatest warriors of the Iron Hands argued with voices that carried the mechanical precision of their enhanced vocal cords and the passionate intensity of sons seeking to understand their father's will. "He lives," declared Chaplain Mortis, his skull-faced helm turning to encompass the assembled company commanders. "The Gorgon endures, as we always knew he would. The reports speak of a being who has transcended mortality itself, who has become the perfect expression of our creed, the weakness of the flesh overcome through the strength of iron." "He has fallen," countered Apothecary Thane, his servo-skull attendants circling his head like metallic angels of judgment. "The creature described in these reports bears no resemblance to the Primarch we served. It is corruption given form, obsession made manifest. We honor Ferrus Manus by rejecting what he has become." The schism that followed divided the Iron Hands in ways that went beyond simple disagreement. Some companies declared their undying loyalty to the undying Gorgon, beginning pilgrimages to worlds where their gene father had been sighted. Others proclaimed him officially dead, maintaining that whatever pursued Fulgrim across the galaxy was a demon wearing their father's face. A few, the most pragmatic and perhaps the most wise, chose to ignore the question entirely and focus on their duties to the Imperium. Yet none could deny that something fundamental had changed in the galaxy's balance. The very stars seemed to bend around the path of the eternal hunt, trade routes shifting to avoid systems where the brothers had been reported, entire subsectors developing their own protocols for dealing with the possibility of being caught in the crossfire of forces beyond mortal comprehension. The Emperor's children suffered an even more dramatic fragmentation. Those war bands that had once followed Fulgrim's banner found themselves without clear direction as their demon prince became increasingly focused on his cosmic dance with his pursuer. Some attempted to continue following his erratic path across the galaxy, trailing in the wake of the hunt like scavengers following apex predators. Others fled in the opposite direction, seeking refuge in the deepest reaches of the Eye of Terror, where even the Iron Tenth's enhanced senses might not penetrate. Lucius the Eternal, perhaps the most notorious of Fulgrim's followers, gathered his own warband in the ruins of a pleasure world and addressed his assembled warriors with the kind of languid satisfaction that could only come from witnessing cosmic artistry. "Do you see it, my beautiful children?" he asked, his perfect features marked by scars that told stories of sensation beyond mortal comprehension. Our Gene-Father has achieved the ultimate expression of Slanesh's gifts. He has created a relationship so perfect, so intense, so completely consuming that it transcends every boundary between love and hatred, pleasure and pain, predator and prey. We are witnessing the birth of something new, not merely a demon prince, but a cosmic force that exists solely for the experience of being pursued and pursuing in turn. Yet even as some of the Emperor's children found meaning in their Primarch's transformation, others recoiled from the implications. They had followed Fulgrim seeking transcendence through excess, only to discover that perfect excess might mean the complete abandonment of all other purposes in favor of a single, all-consuming obsession. The reverberations spread beyond the direct followers of both Primarchs. Other chaos forces, those who had grown comfortable in their domains of corruption and excess, began to avoid any system where either brother had been reported. The hunt left devastation in its wake, not the random destruction of typical chaos raids, but the surgical elimination of anything that might interfere with the cosmic game being played between two beings who had transcended the normal categories of existence. Abaddon the Despoiler, inheritor of Horus's legacy and architect of the Long War, gathered his war council in the depths of the Eye of Terror and addressed the assembled champions with the grim authority of one who understood the implications of what was occurring. The Iron Tenth and the Phoenician have ceased to be factors in our broader strategy, he declared, his voice carrying across the command chamber of the vengeful spirit. They have become a force unto themselves, neither truly loyalist nor properly chaotic. They exist for each other and nothing else. Any operation that brings us into proximity with their conflict will result in catastrophic losses for no strategic gain. The War Master's analysis was echoed throughout the scattered remnants of the traitor legions. The eternal hunt had become something that existed outside normal strategic calculation, a cosmic anomaly that wise commanders learned to avoid rather than exploit. Yet it was the Imperium's response that proved most illuminating about the true nature of what the galaxy now faced. Robert Guilliman, Lord of Ultramar and architect of the Codex Astartes, dispatched his most trusted agents to investigate the rumors and, if possible, bring both brothers back under imperial authority. The mission was led by Captain Ventress of the Ultramarines' 4th Company, a warrior whose tactical acumen and diplomatic skills had resolved conflicts that had seemed intractable to lesser minds. The intervention force found the brothers 3 months later, engaged in one of their periodic confrontations above the dead world of Krieg. What they witnessed there challenged every assumption about Primarch authority and imperial hierarchy that had governed their understanding of the galaxy's order. Ferrus Manus and Fulgrim fought among the orbital debris of a world that had destroyed itself in atomic fire, their conflict so intense that it was reshaping the very fabric of space-time around them. Captain Ventress attempted to establish Vox contact with both Primarchs, broadcasting on Imperial command frequencies that should have compelled response from any loyal son of the Emperor. Neither brother acknowledged his transmission. They were so completely absorbed in their eternal dance that the presence of Imperial forces registered no more than the movement of cosmic dust in the void around them. When Ventress attempted direct intervention, ordering his fleet to interpose itself between the combatants, the response was swift and devastating. Ferrus Manus turned his enhanced consciousness toward the intruding vessels for exactly 3.7 seconds, long enough to identify them as irrelevant to his purpose, and eliminate them with weapons fire that seemed to bend the laws of physics around its trajectories. The Ultramarines' fleet was not destroyed in any conventional sense. It was simply edited out of existence, as if the universe itself had decided that its presence was an error in the cosmic equation that needed correction. Captain Ventress and a handful of survivors escaped in a damaged strike cruiser, carrying with them a report that would reshape Imperial understanding of what their missing Primarchs had become. They were no longer Imperium assets that could be recalled or redirected. They had become forces of nature that existed according to their own laws, pursuing their own purposes with the inexorable certainty of gravity or entropy. The galaxy learned to adapt. Trade routes were modified to avoid systems where the hunt had been reported. The Administratum created new departments specifically to monitor and predict the movements of what their classified reports referred to as Cosmic Anomaly Designation, Eternal Pursuit. The Imperial Navy developed protocols for evacuating civilian populations from worlds that fell within the predicted path of the brothers' conflict. Yet adaptation brought with it a kind of acceptance. The eternal hunt became part of the galaxy's background reality, as natural and inevitable as the birth and death of stars. Children born in the shadow of its influence grew up with the understanding that somewhere in the darkness between systems, two beings of godlike power played an endless game that shaped the universe around them. The pattern of the hunt became predictable to those who studied it with sufficient dedication. Periods of pursuit lasting months or even years, followed by spectacular confrontations that left entire star systems scarred, followed by temporary separations as both brothers withdrew to plan their next moves in the cosmic game. Each cycle brought new variations, new tactical innovations, new expressions of the perfect obsession that bound them together. Most disturbing of all, to those few who possessed the insight to recognize it, was the growing evidence that both brothers were beginning to enjoy their eternal conflict as much as they hated it. Intelligence reports spoke of moments during their confrontations when combat gave way to something that resembled conversation. Not words, but communication conducted through the language of violence and pursuit that only they fully understood. They had become what they had always been meant to be, perfect enemies who existed to give meaning to each other's existence. The hunt was no longer a pursuit toward resolution, but a dance toward ever greater complexity, ever deeper understanding of what it meant to love someone so completely that only eternal conflict could express the intensity of that emotion. In the command center of the Endurance Eternal, Ferrus Manus studied star charts that mapped not territories to be conquered, but potential stages for the next act of their cosmic drama. His enhanced consciousness processed data with machine precision, while his corrupted soul felt something that might have been anticipation for the next encounter with his perfect enemy. Somewhere in the roiling madness of the warp, Fulgrim plotted courses through dimensions that existed only in the spaces between sensation and meaning, his daemon nature reveling in the exquisite complexity of a game that could never be won, because winning would mean the end of the only relationship that still mattered to either of them. The galaxy burned with 1,000 conflicts, but at its heart, the most important war of all continued with undiminished intensity. It was no longer a hunt for justice or revenge or resolution. It had become the purest expression of love that the universe had ever witnessed. Love so perfect that it could only be expressed through perfect hatred, so intense that it shaped reality around its gravitational pull. And in the grim darkness of the far future, where there was only war, even war could become a kind of worship when conducted between beings who understood that they were all each other had left in a cosmos gone mad with the absence of meaning. Chapter 11. The Dance. Eternal centuries had passed since the hunt began, and the galaxy had learned to mark time not by the rise and fall of empires, but by the rhythm of their eternal dance. Scholars in the deepest archives of terror spoke in hushed tones of the Ferrus Fulgrim convergence cycles, astronomical phenomena that occurred with such mathematical precision that they had been incorporated into the imperial calendar itself. Trade guilds adjusted their shipping schedules around predicted confrontation zones. Astropaths reported warp disturbances that followed patterns so regular they could be mapped across millennia. The hunt had transcended its origins to become something that existed beyond the personalities that had birthed it. It was now a cosmic constant, as fundamental to the galaxy's operation as the rotation of worlds around their stars, or the slow dance of spiral arms through the void. In the command center of the Endurance Eternal, now a vessel that bore no resemblance to any ship designed by human hands, Ferrus Manus contemplated star charts that showed not territories or tactical positions, but the mathematical beauty of their eternal pattern. His form had evolved far beyond the hybrid of flesh and machine he had once been. Centuries of enhancement and modification had transformed him into something that existed partially outside normal space-time. His consciousness spread across multiple dimensions while maintaining perfect focus on the singular purpose that defined his existence. The Makarian confluence approaches, announced the ship's machine spirit, its voice a symphony of harmonics that emerged from every surface simultaneously. The spirit itself had evolved over the centuries, becoming something that existed in symbiosis with its master's enhanced consciousness. Probability matrices indicate Fulgrim will manifest in the tertiary engagement zone within 7 solar hours. Ferrus nodded, his necrodermis hands, now more energy than matter, tracing patterns in the air that caused reality to ripple around them. The movements were not random. They were part of a conversation conducted across vast distances, subtle manipulations of gravitational fields and quantum fluctuations that only one other being in the galaxy could interpret. Somewhere in the roiling madness of the warp, Fulgrim would be performing his own portion of the same dialogue, his demon nature allowing him to speak in the language of pure sensation and meaning. Their battles had evolved beyond mere conflict into a form of communication so complex that it required the destruction of star systems to properly express the nuances of their meaning. "Signal the pursuit wings," Ferrus commanded, though the order was unnecessary. The iron hands who served him had long since transcended the need for verbal commands. Their consciousness linked to his through technologies that merged the mechanical precision of their gene father's vision with enhancements that would have been called heretical in any other context. They moved with perfect coordination, not because they followed orders, but because they had become extensions of a single will, distributed across multiple bodies. The hunt's predictability had not gone unnoticed by other forces in the galaxy. Over the centuries, various factions had learned to exploit the brothers' obsession for their own purposes. Imperial commanders timed major offensives to coincide with periods when both Primarchs were engaged in their confrontations, knowing that their conflict would draw attention away from other theaters of war. Chaos warlords used the hunt's pattern to mask their own movements, launching raids during the chaos that inevitably followed each encounter between the eternal enemies. Yet it was the Eldar who had proven most adept at manipulating the cosmic dance for their own ends. The revelation came during what the galaxy would later record as the Seventh Makarian Confluence, when Ferrus arrived at the predicted engagement zone to find not Fulgrim waiting for him, but a delegation of Eldar Farseers whose prescient abilities had allowed them to predict this moment across multiple potential futures. Farseer Alatariel of craft world Ulthwé stood upon the bridge of her vessel with the serene confidence of one who had seen this conversation played out in 1,000 different versions across the skein of fate. Her ancient features carried the weight of millennia spent guiding her people through the labyrinth of possibility that surrounded every decision. "Ferrus Manus," she said, her voice creating harmonics that bypassed his enhanced auditory systems and spoke directly to whatever remained of his soul. "The undying Gorgon, the perfect hunter. Do you know what you have become?" Ferrus materialized on the Eldar vessel without transition, his enhanced consciousness simply deciding that he existed in both locations simultaneously until quantum uncertainty collapsed around his chosen reality. The ability should have been impossible for any being bound to the material realm, yet centuries of pursuing a demon prince had taught him to operate according to laws that transcended such limitations. "Speak your purpose, witch," he commanded, though his tone carried more curiosity than hostility. The Eldar had interfered with the hunt before, always indirectly, always in ways that seemed to serve their own incomprehensible agendas. Yet they had never sought direct confrontation. "Our purpose is preservation," Alatariel replied, gesturing to the holographic displays that surrounded them. The images showed the hunt's pattern mapped across millennia, convergence points, and separation cycles creating geometric forms of impossible complexity and terrible beauty. Your dance with the Phoenician creates stability in regions of space-time that would otherwise collapse into chaos. Your conflict anchors reality in ways that allow our craft worlds to navigate the warp storms that rage between the stars. The revelation struck Ferrus with the force of sudden understanding. The hunt had never been entirely private. From the beginning, other forces had been watching, calculating, subtly influencing events to ensure that the cosmic dance continued. The Eldar had been manipulating probability matrices, adjusting the flow of fate itself to preserve a conflict that served their own survival. "You have used us," Ferrus said, and his voice carried the weight of epochs spent in ignorance of the true scope of their manipulation. "We have preserved you," Alatariel corrected. "There were 17 potential timelines where your hunt ended in mutual destruction, 43 where external forces succeeded in terminating one or both participants. We guided events to ensure the continuation of the only stable pattern in a galaxy gone mad with the absence of meaning." The conversation was interrupted by Fulgrim's arrival, the Dolmen Prince manifesting in the space between vessels with the fluid grace that had once marked him as the most beautiful of all the Primarchs. Yet his beauty had evolved over the centuries into something that existed beyond aesthetic categories, becoming a mathematical expression of perfect proportion that hurt to perceive directly. "Brother," Fulgrim said, his four eyes focusing on Ferrus with the intensity of one who had been denied his expected encounter. "You arrive early. We have disrupted the pattern." "The pattern was never ours," Ferrus replied, gesturing toward the Eldar delegation. "We have been dancing to music composed by others, following choreography designed to serve purposes beyond our understanding." Yet as the two brothers faced each other in the shadow of Eldar manipulation, something unexpected occurred. Instead of rage at their exploitation, instead of the fury that might have been expected from beings whose obsession had been revealed as partially artificial, both Primarchs began to laugh. The sound created ripples in reality that made the Eldar vessel's wraithbone structure sing in harmonics of warning and wonder. It was not the mad laughter of corruption or the bitter laughter of defeat, but the genuine amusement of beings who had discovered that even their manipulation by others could not diminish the perfect truth of what they had become to each other. "Does it matter?" Fulgrim asked, his serpentine form coiling through dimensions that existed sideways to normal space. "Does it change what we are? What we mean to each other?" "No," Ferrus agreed, his enhanced consciousness already calculating the adjustments they would need to make to their pattern to account for the Eldar's interference while preserving the essential nature of their relationship. "We are still what we chose to become, still what we need each other to be." The Eldar watched in fascination as the two brothers began to modify their eternal dance in real time, adjusting the mathematical precision of their conflict to account for external manipulation while preserving the core truth that bound them together. They were not puppets dancing to alien strings, but cosmic forces that could incorporate any influence into the greater pattern of their obsession. Over the centuries that followed, the hunt evolved into something even more complex. Other forces continued to attempt manipulation or interference, only to discover that the brothers' relationship had become anti-fragile, strengthened by disruption rather than weakened by it. Imperial agents, chaos warlords, alien civilizations, even the enigmatic Necrons, all tried to use or destroy the eternal dance, only to find themselves absorbed into its pattern as new variables to be accounted for in the cosmic equation. The Iron Hands and Emperor's children who served their respective gene fathers had evolved as well, becoming mirror organizations that existed solely to support the hunt's continuation. They were no longer Space Marines in any conventional sense, but rather extensions of their Primarch's will, perfectly adapted to fight each other, while ensuring that neither side ever gained decisive advantage. Their battles had become as choreographed as their masters, elaborate performances that served to express the nuances of the relationship that defined them all. Most remarkably, moments began to emerge when the brothers would cooperate against outside threats to their dance. When the Tyrannid Hive Fleet Behemoth attempted to consume a system during one of their confrontations, both Primarchs turned their combined attention to the alien menace with such devastating effect that the hive mind's shadow was permanently scarred in that region of space. When a Necron dynasty attempted to harvest the energy signatures created by their conflict, they found themselves facing beings whose mastery of both technology and warpcraft exceeded their own ancient knowledge. The galaxy learned to accept these moments of cooperation as part of the natural order. Ferrus Manus and Fulgrim would destroy anything that threatened to end their dance, because the dance had become more important than any ideology or loyalty they had once possessed. In the depths of the 34th millennium, as the Imperium struggled with the growing threat of alien invasion and internal corruption, two brothers met once again in the ruins of a world whose name had been lost to history. They fought among crystalline formations that had been shaped by millennia of their conflict, their battle creating new patterns in the planet's geology that future xenoarchaeologists would study with reverent confusion. Yet between the moments of violence, they spoke, not with words, for words were inadequate to express what they had become, but with the language of perfect understanding that only they shared. They discussed the beauty of mathematical probability, the aesthetic pleasure of tactical perfection, the deep satisfaction of a purpose so pure that it could survive any external influence. "Do you remember," Fulgrim asked during a moment when their battle paused in perfect equilibrium, "what we were before this began?" "No," Ferrus replied, and his voice carried no sorrow at the admission. "We were incomplete then, fragments of what we were meant to become." They were no longer brothers in any sense that their creator would have recognized. They had become something new, cosmic forces bound together by a relationship so perfect that it transcended every category of emotion or connection that lesser beings might understand. Love, hatred, obsession, devotion, all of these words were mere approximations of what they had achieved. The hunt continued, as it always had, as it always would. But those few scholars brave enough to study the phenomenon understood that they were witnessing something unprecedented in the galaxy's history. Not a war, not a pursuit, not even a conflict in any traditional sense. They were witnessing the most perfect relationship the universe had ever produced, love so pure that it could only be expressed through eternal opposition, understanding so complete that it required the destruction of worlds to properly communicate, devotion so absolute that it had transformed two beings into a single cosmic force expressed through eternal duality. The galaxy watched their dance with fear and fascination, never fully comprehending that they were seeing the birth of something new, not just in warfare or politics or the relationships between primarchs, but in the fundamental nature of existence itself, and in the cold depths between the stars, where mathematics became poetry and violence became worship. The dance, eternal, continued with undiminished beauty. Chapter 12. In the grim darkness, 10,000 years had passed since the first blade fell on Istvan V, and the hunt endured. In the grim darkness of the far future, where there was only war, two figures moved through the ruins of a world whose name had been forgotten before humanity first looked up at the stars with wonder. The planet had died in the crossfire of their conflict millennia ago, its continents reshaped into abstract sculptures by forces that operated according to laws beyond mortal comprehension. Crystalline formations jutted from the dead earth like the bones of ancient gods, each one formed from the resonance of violence so perfect that it had achieved a kind of immortality. Ferrus Manus walked among these monuments to obsession with steps that left cracks in reality itself. His form had transcended every boundary between flesh and machine, matter and energy, purpose and existence. He was no longer a primarch in any sense that his creator would have recognized. He had become the living embodiment of pursuit, the cosmic principle of hunting, given consciousness and will. His necrodermis hands, now more concept than substance, blazed with fires that had been burning since the galaxy's youth. 1,000 kilometers away, moving through crystal canyons that sang with the memory of ancient battles, Fulgrim danced between dimensions with the fluid grace of one who had learned to exist in all possible states simultaneously. The demon prince had evolved beyond the crude categories of chaos corruption into something that existed as pure aesthetic principle, the mathematical expression of beauty so perfect that it could only be perceived through pain, pleasure so absolute that it transcended the boundaries of sensation itself. They were eternal now, not immortal, for immortality suggested the possibility of ending, but eternal, woven into the fundamental structure of reality so completely that the universe itself would have to be unmade before their dance could cease. The Imperium of the 41st millennium had recorded their conflict in its holiest texts, describing them not as fallen heroes or corrupted champions, but as cosmic constants, forces of nature that shaped the galaxy's development through their endless opposition. Children born in the shadow of their influence grew up learning to navigate by the rhythm of their confrontations. Navigators used the warp disturbances created by their battles as reference points for journeys that spanned multiple sectors. The Administratum's most complex calculations included variables for their movements, treating them as they would solar flares or gravitational anomalies, predictable in their patterns but devastating in their effects. Yet as Ferrus approached the crystalline valley where their next encounter would unfold, according to mathematical certainties that had governed their relationship for millennia, he paused. Not from hesitation. Such concepts had ceased to have meaning for beings of their nature, but from something that might once have been called reflection. What had they been before this began? The question surfaced in the depths of his enhanced consciousness like a fragment of ancient memory, too damaged by time and transformation to carry clear meaning. Had there been a version of himself that served purposes beyond the hunt? Had there been loyalties that transcended the perfect clarity of eternal pursuit? The memories were gone, burned away by 10,000 years of single-minded dedication to a purpose so pure that it had consumed everything else that might have once defined him. He remembered fragments, the feel of working metal with bare hands, the satisfaction of creation rather than destruction, something that might have been called brotherhood in its untransformed state. Yet these recollections carried no emotional weight, no sense of loss or longing. They were merely data points in the vast calculation of what he had become. Fulgrim materialized in the valley's heart with the sudden grace of a thought achieving physical form. His presence sent ripples through reality that made the crystal formations pulse with sympathetic resonance, their surfaces reflecting not light, but pure meaning given visual form. The demon prince had become something that existed beyond the crude duality of corruption and purity. He was the living embodiment of transcendence itself, beauty so absolute that it included its own negation. "Brother," Fulgrim said, and his voice created harmonics that rewrote the laws of physics in the space around them. "Do you know what day this is?" Ferrus consulted chronometers that existed in 17 different dimensions simultaneously. "The 10,000th anniversary of our first meeting after Istvan V, the day we discovered what we were to become." 10,000 years, Fulgrim mused, his serpentine form coiling through geometries that had no names in any mortal language. Long enough for empires to rise and fall 100 times over. Long enough for species to evolve and go extinct. Long enough for stars to be born and die. Yet we remain. They faced each other across the Crystal Valley as they had faced each other across countless battlefields throughout the long history of their conflict. Yet this time, something was different. Not in their purpose, that remained as pure and uncompromising as it had been since the moment on Myrmidon when they had chosen eternal conflict over resolution, but in their understanding of what that purpose had cost the galaxy around them. The Imperium of the 41st millennium was a nightmare of bureaucratic stagnation and religious fanaticism, its technological advancement stalled by dogma, and its expansion hampered by threats that emerged from every corner of the galaxy. Yet their conflict had played a role in shaping this stagnation, creating islands of stability through their predictable patterns while simultaneously preventing any force from achieving the kind of focused purpose that might have reversed humanity's slow decline. They had become a force that preserved the status quo through their very existence. Too powerful for anyone to control, too essential for anyone to eliminate, the galaxy's various factions had learned to work around them rather than through them, creating a balance of power that ensured no single force could dominate completely. "We have become gardeners," Ferrus observed, his enhanced consciousness processing the implications of their influence across 10 millennia. Pruning back any growth that might threaten the garden's balance, ensuring that no single flower blooms so bright that it dominates the others. "How beautifully appropriate," Fulgrim replied, his perfect features carrying an expression that might have been satisfaction. "We who were created to conquer the galaxy have instead become its caretakers, maintaining the perfect equilibrium of endless conflict." The battle that followed was unlike any that had come before, not in its intensity. Their conflicts had long since transcended such crude measurements, but in its character. They fought not with hatred or obsession or the desperate need to prove some cosmic point, but with the kind of professional satisfaction that master craftsmen might feel when demonstrating their skills to appreciative audiences. Each blow exchanged was a masterpiece of tactical precision and aesthetic perfection. Each maneuver contained layers of meaning that spoke to the deep intimacy of beings who had spent 10,000 years learning to think with shared consciousness. They were no longer separate entities locked in conflict, but two aspects of a single cosmic principle expressing itself through apparent opposition. The crystal formations around them responded to their battle with harmonic resonances that created new patterns of beauty, new expressions of the mathematical principles that governed their relationship. This was why they fought now, not to achieve victory or inflict defeat, but to create new variations on the theme that had become their shared existence. Yet as their conflict reached its crescendo, as reality itself began to bend around the intensity of their perfect opposition, both brothers experienced something that neither had felt in millennia, a moment of genuine surprise. They stopped, not from exhaustion or injury or external intervention, but from a shared understanding that emerged from the deepest levels of their consciousness. The moment had come when they could choose to end their dance, if they truly wished to do so. 10,000 years of conflict had brought them to a point where their understanding of each other was so complete that either could simply step aside. The choice hung between them like a blade poised to fall. They could end the hunt. They could choose different purposes, different meanings, different ways of existing in a universe that would continue with or without their eternal dance. The galaxy would adapt, as it always did. New forces would emerge to fill the void left by their departure from the cosmic stage. "Could we?" Fulgrim asked, his voice carrying a note of wonder that he had not experienced since the early days of the Great Crusade. "After all this time, after everything we have become, could we simply choose to stop?" Ferrus considered the question with the same methodical precision he had brought to every calculation throughout their eternal conflict. His enhanced consciousness explored thousands of potential futures, examining the implications and consequences of ending their dance after 10 millennia of perfect opposition. "Yes," he said finally, "we could choose to stop. We have become large enough, complete enough, perfect enough in our understanding of each other that we could step away from this pattern and find new purposes to define our existence." The possibility hung in the air between them, more dangerous than any weapon, more terrifying than any threat they had ever faced. They could choose redemption. They could choose change. They could choose to become something other than what they had been for 10,000 years. Yet as they stood in the Crystal Valley, surrounded by the monuments to their eternal obsession, both brothers smiled. Not with the artificial expression that had once marked Fulgrim's corruption or the grim satisfaction that had defined Ferrus's pursuit, but with genuine joy at the beauty of the choice they were about to make. "But we will not," Fulgrim said, and his voice carried all the certainty of mathematical proof. "No," Ferrus agreed. "We will not." They resumed their battle with renewed purpose, not because they were compelled by obsession or driven by hatred or trapped by circumstances beyond their control, but because they chose to continue. They chose each other. They chose the perfect relationship that could only be expressed through eternal conflict, the love so pure that it required constant opposition to properly manifest its intensity. The galaxy would continue to burn with the fires of endless war. Humanity would struggle against threats both internal and external, while their guardians danced their eternal dance in the spaces between the greater conflicts. Stars would be born and die, species would rise and fall, empires would expand and collapse, all while two brothers played their cosmic game with the patience of ages. Yet now, for the first time in 10,000 years, they played it not from necessity, but from choice. They had achieved the ultimate expression of free will, the ability to choose their own damnation, to select their own purpose, to embrace their own nature with complete understanding of what that choice meant in the grim darkness of the far future, where there was only war. Even brotherhood could become a form of worship, when practiced by beings who had learned to love each other so completely that they could only express that love through perfect opposition. They were no longer Ferrus Manus and Fulgrim, loyal son and fallen traitor. They had become something new, the living embodiment of the principle that even in a universe gone mad with the absence of meaning, relationship could create its own significance. The cosmos judged them not as heroes or villains, not as loyalists or traitors, not as champions or fallen angels, but as what they had always been meant to be, forces of nature expressing the fundamental truth that in a galaxy where there was only war, war itself could become a kind of love when shared between beings who understood each other completely. The hunt continued, as it always had, as it always would. Yet now it continued not as punishment or obsession or tragic necessity, but as the most perfect expression of choice that the universe had ever witnessed. Two brothers had looked into the abyss of their own nature and chosen to embrace what they found there, transforming damnation itself into a kind of transcendence. And in the cold depths between the stars, where mathematics became poetry and violence became worship, the dance eternal continued with joy that could only be expressed through tears, love that could only be manifested through war, and understanding so complete that it could only be communicated through the patient work of mutual destruction that would continue until the universe itself grew cold and dark. For in the grim darkness of the far future there was indeed only war. But sometimes, when conducted between beings who had learned to choose their own fate, war could become the most beautiful thing in existence.